Have you ever sat in a coffee shop, laptop open, latte in hand, and wondered how this whole scene came to be? We take cafes for granted, these cozy corners where we work, meet friends, or just watch the world go by. But the story of the coffee house is a fascinating journey that spans centuries and continents. It's a tale of ritual, rebellion, art, and revolution, all swirling in a single cup. So grab your favorite mug, get comfortable, and let's travel back in time to uncover how these beloved spaces became the social and intellectual hubs we know today. Our story begins not in a bustling European city, but in the highlands of Ethiopia, the legendary birthplace of coffee. Imagine ancient herders noticing their goats becoming unusually energetic after nibbling on the berries of a certain plant. This discovery, shrouded in legend, eventually led to people cultivating the coffee plant. But it wasn't initially a beverage for casual sipping. In the Sufi monasteries of Yemen around the 15th century, coffee had a much more sacred purpose. Monks would brew the beans to create a drink that helped them stay awake and focused during long nights of religious ceremonies and prayer. It was a spiritual tool, a way to enhance devotion and connect with the divine. This powerful brew was their secret, a ritualistic drink that sharpened the mind for spiritual pursuits. From these quiet monasteries, the secret of coffee couldn't be contained for long. As pilgrims and traders traveled through the region, they experienced the invigorating effects of this dark, aromatic drink. Soon, coffee moved from the sacred halls of the monastery into the public sphere. The first coffee houses, known as cafés, emerged in cities across the Middle East, like Cairo, Damascus, and Istanbul, during the 15th and 16th centuries. These weren't just places to get a quick caffeine fix. They were entirely new kinds of social spaces. For the first time, people from different walks of life had a place to gather outside of their homes or places of worship. These early coffee houses were revolutionary. They were furnished with rugs and cushions, creating a relaxed and welcoming atmosphere. Men would gather to drink coffee, of course, but also to do so much more. They played games like chess and backgammon, listened to storytellers and poets, and most importantly, they talked. They discussed business, politics, and the news of the day. For this reason, these establishments were nicknamed schools of the wise. They were centers of information exchange, a place where public opinion was formed long before the advent of newspapers. It was here that coffee's transformation from a ritualistic drink to a social lubricant was complete. As we move into the 17th century, the aroma of coffee begins to drift towards Europe. Venetian merchants, with their extensive trade networks in the East, were the first to bring coffee beans to the continent. Initially, it was sold as a medicinal item by apothecaries, a mysterious and expensive tonic from a faraway land. The church was suspicious, with some even calling it the bitter invention of Satan. The story goes that Pope Clement VIII was asked to ban it, but before doing so, he decided to try it for himself. He was so pleased with its taste and aroma that he reportedly baptized it, declaring it a permissible Christian beverage. With the Pope's blessing, the path was cleared for coffee to conquer Europe. And conquer it did. The first European coffee house is believed to have opened in Venice in 1645, but it was in London where the coffeehouse culture truly exploded. By the mid-17th century, London was buzzing with hundreds of them. Each coffee house attracted a specific clientele. You had coffee houses for merchants and ship owners like Edward Lloyd's, which eventually evolved into the famous insurance market, Lloyd's of London. There were coffee houses for scientists, where members of the Royal Society would meet to debate new theories. And there were coffee houses for writers, politicians, and artists. They became known as penny universities, because for the price of a cup of coffee, 1 penny, you could listen to and participate in brilliant conversations, read the latest pamphlets, and engage with the greatest minds of the age. These English coffee houses were remarkably democratic spaces. Unlike the rigid social hierarchies that dominated the rest of society, inside the coffee house, a person's social standing mattered less than the quality of their arguments. A tradesman could find himself in a lively debate with a nobleman. This free exchange of ideas was powerful, and it made some authorities nervous. King Charles II even tried to shut down the coffee houses in 1675, fearing they were breeding grounds for political dissent and plots against him. But the public outcry was so immense that he had to back down. The people had tasted both coffee and freedom of speech, and they weren't willing to give up either. Meanwhile, across the English Channel, Paris was developing its own unique coffeehouse culture. The famous Café, which opened in 1686, became the city's premier literary and intellectual salon. It was a favorite haunt of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot. Imagine them, gathered around a table, sipping coffee and passionately debating the very ideas of liberty, reason, and human rights that would eventually fuel the French Revolution. The café became the unofficial headquarters of the Enlightenment, a place where philosophical and political ideas were forged and sharpened before being unleashed upon the world. It was in Parisian cafés like this that the intellectual groundwork for modern democracy was laid. As we move into the 18th and 19th centuries, the role of the coffeehouse continued to evolve. In Vienna, the coffeehouse became a grand and elegant second living room. Viennese coffeehouses were known for their plush seating, marble-topped tables, and the wide array of newspapers they offered. They became centers of artistic and intellectual life, frequented by writers, musicians, and thinkers like Sigmund Freud. This was the birth of slow social, the idea of lingering for hours over a single cup of coffee, reading, writing, or simply observing the world. This culture of unhurried contemplation and creativity is a legacy that many coffee shops still aspire to today. And what about America? Coffee arrived with the colonists, but tea was initially the more popular drink. That all changed dramatically with the Boston Tea Party in 1773. As a protest against British taxation, drinking tea became a political statement of loyalty to the crown. Patriots, in turn, embraced coffee as their beverage of choice. Coffeehouses like the Green Dragon Tavern in Boston became known as the headquarters of the Revolution, where figures like Samuel Adams and Paul Revere planned their resistance. So, in America, switching from tea to coffee was one of the first acts of patriotic rebellion. So, from a sacred brew in a Yemeni monastery to the engine of revolution and enlightenment, the journey of coffee is about so much more than just a drink. It's the story of how a simple bean created spaces for connection, conversation, and change. The next time you walk into a café, take a moment to look around. You're part of a long and rich tradition. You're in a space that was designed for sharing ideas, for fostering creativity, and for building community one cup at a time. The legacy of the Café Carnet, the Penny University, and the Parisian Salon lives on in every coffee shop today. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to learn more about the fascinating histories behind everyday things, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to have you as part of our community. See you in the next one. Have you ever sat in a coffee shop, maybe with a friend, maybe just with a laptop, and wondered how this whole thing started? This cozy space, the smell of roasted beans, the quiet hum of conversation. It feels so modern, so essential to our lives. But the story of the cafe is a long, winding road, stretching back centuries and across continents. It's a tale of poetry, revolution, art, and the simple, profound act of people coming together over a cup of coffee. So grab your favorite mug, get comfortable, and let's travel back in time to uncover the fascinating history of the coffee house. Our journey begins not in Paris or Vienna, as you might expect, but in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, in the bustling city of Istanbul, then known as Constantinople. By the mid-16th century, coffee, originally from Ethiopia and Yemen, had made its way to the Ottoman capital. And with it came an entirely new kind of social institution, the Café or coffee house. Imagine stepping off a dusty Istanbul street into one of these early cafes. The air is thick with the rich aroma of brewing coffee and perhaps the sweet scent of tobacco from a hookah. The room is filled with men from all walks of life, merchants, scholars, government officials, and artisans lounging on low cushions and ornate carpets. This wasn't a place for quick, rushed transactions. It was a place to linger. Unlike the taverns of Europe, which were often rowdy and centered around alcohol, Ottoman coffee houses were havens of sobriety and intellect. The main attraction, of course, was the coffee itself. It was prepared in a special pot called a sais, brewed strong, dark, and unfiltered, served in small, delicate cups. The bitter, energizing brew was a stimulant not for the body, but for the mind. And stimulate the mind it did. These coffee houses quickly became the city's living rooms, its centers for information and entertainment. News and gossip, what we might call the daily headlines, were exchanged here long before newspapers were common. If you wanted to know the latest political rumor, the price of goods in the market, or news from a distant province, you went to the coffee house. But it was more than just a news hub. It was a cultural incubator. Storytellers, known as meta, would captivate audiences with epic tales, historical accounts and moral fables, acting out all the parts themselves. Their performances were the live theater and podcasts of their day. Poets would recite their latest verses, testing them out on a discerning crowd. Intellectuals would engage in deep philosophical and theological debates. And for those seeking a quieter pastime, there were always games of chess and backgammon being played in the corners. The gentle click of the pieces a constant backdrop to the murmur of conversation. These were spaces of gentle gathering, where social hierarchies could, for a moment, soften. A high-ranking official might find himself listening to the same story as a simple shopkeeper. Ideas flowed freely, unfiltered by the formal structures of the court or the mosque. Because of this, they were sometimes seen as a threat by the authorities. The free exchange of ideas, after all, can lead to dissent. At various times, sultans even tried to ban coffee and close the coffee houses, fearing they were breeding grounds for political plotting. But the public's love for these social hubs was too strong. The bans never lasted long, and the coffee houses always returned, more popular than ever. The Ottoman coffee house was a revolutionary concept. It provided a secular public space for men to socialize, be entertained, and engage in intellectual discourse outside of the home or the place of worship. It was a model of civility and conversation, a place where you could simply sit, sip, and think. This idea of a penny university, where all you needed was the price of a cup of coffee to enter a world of ideas, would soon capture the imagination of another continent. The seed of the café, planted and nurtured in the rich soil of the Ottoman Empire, was about to be carried on the winds of trade and travel to Europe, where it would blossom in entirely new and unexpected ways, fueling revolutions of a different kind. And that's exactly where our story will go next. So, the next time you're enjoying your latte, take a moment to appreciate its deep roots. You're part of a tradition that stretches back over 500 years to those gentle gatherings in Istanbul, where poetry, stories, and conversation flowed as freely as the dark, steaming coffee. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you enjoyed this story and want to find out what happened when coffee houses hit Europe, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. We'd love to have you in our community. See you next time. Have you ever wondered how that daily cup of coffee became a global phenomenon? It's a story filled with adventure, trade, and a dash of suspicion. Today we're traveling back in time, not to the coffee fields of Ethiopia or the bustling bazaars of the Ottoman Empire, but to the shimmering canals and grand palazzos of 16th century Venice. This is where the story of European coffee culture truly begins. Venice, at the height of its power, was the crossroads of the world. Its powerful merchant fleet dominated the Mediterranean, connecting Europe to the exotic markets of the East. Venetian traders, with their keen eye for profit and novelty, were constantly bringing back spices, silks, and strange new commodities. And one of these commodities was a small, dark, and intensely aromatic bean. The first encounters Europeans had with coffee were likely through these Venetian merchants. Imagine a trader returning from a long voyage to Constantinople or Alexandria. He tells stories of a mysterious dark beverage that the locals drank in special houses. They called it kawa. He described it as black as ink, with a potent, stimulating effect that could keep a man awake through long nights of negotiation or study. Initially, these beans were brought back more as a curiosity than a commercial product. They were expensive, rare, and viewed with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. Early European accounts often described coffee in medicinal terms. The German physician Leonhard Rauwolf, who traveled the Near East in the 1570s, wrote about a very good drink made from beans called sho. He noted its inky black color and its use in treating stomach ailments. He saw it as a medicine, something to be prescribed rather than enjoyed. This perception was common. Coffee was sold in apothecaries, alongside other exotic herbs and spices from the Levant. It was a luxury item for the wealthy, who might try it on their doctor's recommendation or simply to show off their access to the latest foreign oddities. The flavor was unlike anything Europeans had ever tasted before, bitter, strong, and complex. It wasn't an instant hit. The preparation method was also unfamiliar. The beans had to be roasted, ground, and then boiled in water, creating a thick, unfiltered brew. It was a far cry from the wine and beer that were the staples of the European diet. But the most intriguing part of the coffee story wasn't just the drink itself, but the culture surrounding it. Venetian diplomats and merchants, visiting the Ottoman Empire, witnessed the vibrant social life of the coffee house. These were places where men from all walks of life gathered to talk, play chess, listen to music, and most importantly, exchange news and ideas. It was a public living room, a hub of information and social interaction powered by this stimulating new drink. This concept was revolutionary. In Europe, social life was largely confined to the home, the church, or the tavern. Taverns were often rowdy places associated with alcohol and intoxication. The coffee house offered a different kind of social space, one that encouraged sobriety, conversation, and intellectual engagement. As more and more Venetians traveled to the east and experienced this culture firsthand, the idea began to take root. They realized coffee wasn't just a medicine. It was a social lubricant. The beans started arriving in Venice in greater quantities, no longer just for the apothecary's shelf, but for a new burgeoning market. The city's strategic location made it the perfect entry point. From Venice, the wine of Arabia, as it was sometimes called, would slowly begin its journey across the continent. However, its spread wasn't without resistance. Some viewed coffee with suspicion, associating it with its Islamic origins. There were even calls for the Pope to ban the bitter invention of Satan. The story goes that Pope Clement VIII, before making a decision, decided to try the beverage for himself. Upon tasting it, he was so delighted that he reportedly baptized it, declaring that it would be a shame to let the infidels have exclusive use of it. While this story is likely apocryphal, it perfectly captures the shift in attitude from suspicion to acceptance. Coffee was here to stay. By the early 17th century, the demand had grown enough to support a new kind of business. The first dedicated coffee vendors began to appear on the streets of Venice, selling the hot beverage to passers-by. But the real breakthrough was yet to come. In 1645, or perhaps a bit later, the exact date is debated by historians, the very first European café, or Bottega del Café, is said to have opened its doors right there in Venice, likely near the bustling Piazza San Marco. This was a game changer. It took coffee out of the apothecary and the private home and put it into a dedicated public space built for leisure and conversation. These early Venetian cafes were elegant affairs, decorated with mirrors, marble tables, and upholstered seating. They offered not just coffee, but also chocolate and other exotic drinks. They were sophisticated, refined, and attracted a clientele of merchants, artists, intellectuals, and nobles. For the first time, Europeans had a place to gather that wasn't a raucous tavern. Here, fueled by the gentle stimulation of caffeine rather than the dulling effects of alcohol, conversations flourished. People discussed business deals, politics, art, and the latest gossip from across the city and the world. The Venetian coffee house became a vital node in the city's information network, a place where news traveled faster than any official decree. Think of it, in an age without newspapers, radio, or the internet, the café was the original social media platform. It was a place where you could connect with others, share information, and be part of a wider community. This quiet revolution, born from the curiosity of Venetian merchants and the appeal of a new social ritual, laid the foundation for the café culture that would sweep across Europe. From the canals of Venice, the coffeehouse concept would travel to London, Paris, Vienna, and beyond, each city adding its own unique flavor to the institution. But it all started here with a few curious traders and a cargo of mysterious beans from the east. Venice didn't just import coffee. It imported a whole new way of socializing, thinking, and being together. So next time you're sitting in your favorite coffee shop, take a moment to think about its long and fascinating journey. It's a history that stretches from the highlands of Ethiopia, through the markets of the Middle East, and into the heart of Europe, all thanks to the adventurous spirit of those Venetian merchants. The quiet fascination they had for a simple being changed the social fabric of the world forever. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed learning about the history of coffee, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the things we eat and drink. Let me know in the comments what your favorite coffee house is and why. See you in the next video. Hello and welcome back. Today we're taking a trip back in time to the elegant, cobblestone streets of Paris. Imagine the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixing with the scent of rain, the murmur of passionate conversations and the clinking of porcelain cups. We're exploring the rise of the Parisian Café, a place that became so much more than just a spot to grab a drink. It became the very heart of French culture. Our story begins in the late 17th century. While coffee had already made its way through the Ottoman Empire and into cities like London, its arrival in Paris was, let's say, a grand affair. The first café, the Procope, opened its doors in 1686, and it wasn't just some rustic tavern. It was a place of unparalleled sophistication. With its marble tables, crystal chandeliers, and walls lined with mirrors, the Procope set the standard. It was a declaration. Coffee in Paris was going to be an experience in art form. This wasn't just a place for the wealthy elite, though. It was a new kind of social space. Unlike the exclusive aristocratic salons, the cafe was open to anyone who could afford a cup of coffee. This simple fact was revolutionary. It created a common ground where people from different walks of life, merchants, writers, clerks, and aristocrats, could mingle, observe, and most importantly, talk. And oh, the talk! The 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment, was fueled by caffeine. Imagine Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot, the great thinkers of the era, gathered around a small table at Le Procope, debating the very nature of government, freedom, and human rights. These weren't just idle chats. These were the conversations that would lay the intellectual groundwork for the French Revolution. The café became a parliament of the people, where new, radical ideas could be shared and sharpened all over a cup of the stimulating new beverage. As we move into the 19th century, the role of the café evolves once again. Paris is now the undisputed capital of art and fashion. The café becomes a stage for this new world. It's where you go not just to drink coffee, but to see and be seen. The boulevards, widened by Baron Haussmann, were lined with cafés that spilled out onto the sidewalks. The terrace was born, turning the entire city into a living theater. This was the era of the flaner, the stroller, the urban explorer who would wander the city, observing modern life. And where was his favorite perch? The café, of course. From there, he could watch the parade of Parisian life, the fashionable ladies in their elaborate dresses, the hurried businessmen, the artists sketching in their notepads. It was a place for flirtation, for gossip, for simply watching the world go by. The café was no longer just a hub for intellectual debate. It was the epicenter of social spectacle. For the artists and writers of the Belle Époque and beyond, the café was a lifeline. Think of the Impressionists Monet, Renoir, Degas. They gathered in cafés like the Café Gabois and the Nouvelle Athènes to argue about art, to challenge the old academic rules, and to support one another. The café was their studio, their office, and their sanctuary. It was a warm place to work when your own apartment was cold, and a cheap cup of coffee could buy you hours of shelter and inspiration. Later, in the early 20th century, a new wave of creatives flocked to the cafés of Montparnasse. Imagine sitting at La Rotonde or Le Dîme and seeing Picasso, Modigliani, or Hemingway walk in. These weren't just customers. They were fixtures. They paid for their drinks with sketches, they wrote masterpieces on napkins, and they forged a community that would redefine modern art and literature. The café wasn't just a backdrop for their work, it was an active participant, a muse. The Parisian Café was a place of beautiful contradictions. It was a public space that felt intimate. It was a place for deep philosophical thought and for light-hearted people watching. It was a haven for revolutionaries and a runway for the fashionable. It was a place of slow social change, where conversations held over countless cups of coffee gradually and profoundly shaped the world we live in today. So the next time you find yourself sitting in a cafe, whether in Paris or your own hometown, take a moment. Listen to the murmur of conversations, watch the people passing by, and feel that unique energy. You're participating in a tradition that's centuries old, a tradition of connection, creativity, and conversation. You're part of the ongoing story of the cafe. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the elegant and exciting history of the Parisian cafe. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the past, please give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever wondered what people did before social media? Where did they get their news? Debate the hot topics of the day? Or just, hang out and share ideas? Well, for a fascinating period in London's history, the answer wasn't a screen, but a cup of coffee. Today, we're stepping back in time to 17th and 18th century London, a city buzzing with energy, change, and the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans. We're going to explore the rise of the English coffeehouse, institutions so vital to intellectual life that they earned a very special nickname, penny universities. So, pour yourself a fresh brew, get comfortable, and let's journey back to a time when a single penny could buy you more than just a coffee. It could buy you an education. It all started in the mid-1600s. London was a chaotic, rapidly expanding city. The first coffee house, according to popular accounts, was opened in 1652 in St. Michael's Alley by a man named Pasqua Rossi. Now, coffee itself wasn't entirely new, but this idea of a public house dedicated to serving it, that was revolutionary. Before coffee houses, the main social hub was the tavern or the alehouse. These places were associated with alcohol, rowdiness, and a certain kind of boisterous, often unfocused conversation. Coffee offered a completely different kind of buzz. It was a stimulant, yes, but one that sharpened the mind, encouraging alertness and clear-headed discussion. And Londoners couldn't get enough of it. Within a few decades, hundreds of coffee houses had sprung up across the city, each with its own unique character and clientele. You had coffee houses for merchants, for politicians, for scientists, for writers, for artists, and for gossips. This is where the magic really begins. Unlike the exclusive clubs or royal courts, the coffee house was remarkably democratic. For the price of a single penny, you could purchase a cup of coffee and, more importantly, a seat at the table. Your social status, your wealth, your background, it all seemed to melt away once you stepped inside. A humble clerk could find himself sitting next to a renowned poet, an aspiring scientist listening in on a debate between established members of the Royal Society. This leveling effect was the key to their power. So why penny universities? The name says it all. The penny was the price of admission, the cost of the coffee. The university part referred to the incredible wealth of knowledge and information swirling within their walls. These weren't formal institutions, of course. There were no professors or exams. The learning was organic, flowing from conversation and debate. Imagine it. You walk into a coffee house like Jonathan's in Exchange Alley. The air is thick with smoke and the murmur of 100 conversations. In one corner, merchants are dissecting the latest shipping news from the East Indies, essentially creating the London Stock Exchange right there on the spot. In another corner, writers like Joseph Addison and Richard Steele are observing the scene, gathering material for their influential periodicals, The Tatler and The Spectator, which were often read aloud to the patrons. Need the latest political news? You'd go to a coffee house in Westminster. Interested in scientific discoveries? You'd head to the Grecian Coffee House, a favorite haunt of Sir Isaac Newton and other members of the Royal Society. They were the internet of their day, a decentralized network for the rapid spread of information, news, and gossip. Handwritten newsletters were passed from table to table, and runners would dash between houses with the latest updates. These weren't just passive listening spaces either. They were incubators of fiery debate. The rules of the coffee house often encouraged civility and sober discussion, a stark contrast to the alcohol-fueled arguments of the tavern. Patrons were there to sharpen their wits, test their arguments, and learn from those who disagreed with them. This constant exchange of ideas was a powerful engine for intellectual and social progress. Ideas that would fuel the Enlightenment were polished and refined in the lively debates of London's coffee houses. Even major businesses got their start in these establishments. Edward Lloyd's Coffee House on Lombard Street was a gathering place for ship captains, merchants, and ship owners. They would meet to share shipping news and underwrite insurance for voyages. This informal gathering eventually grew into one of the world's most famous insurance markets, Lloyd's of London. It's an incredible thought, a global financial institution born from conversations over coffee. But not everyone was a fan. King Charles II famously tried to suppress them in 1675, issuing a proclamation to shut them down. Why? Because he saw them as seminaries of sedition, places where ordinary people could gather, criticize the government, and spread rebellious ideas. The public outcry was so immense that he was forced to withdraw the proclamation. It was a clear sign of how deeply ingrained coffeehouses had become in the fabric of London life. People would not give up their right to gather, talk, and drink coffee. The golden age of the penny university eventually faded as the 19th century dawned. Exclusive gentlemen's clubs became more fashionable for the wealthy, and the rise of the printed newspaper made the coffeehouse less essential as a primary news source. But their legacy is undeniable. They fundamentally changed the way people socialized and exchanged information. They provided a public space for intellectual curiosity, open debate, and social mixing that was unprecedented. They fostered innovation in business, science, literature, and politics. They proved that a simple, accessible space, combined with a mind-sharpening beverage, could become a powerful catalyst for change. So the next time you meet a friend at a local cafe, take a moment to look around. That simple act of sitting, talking, and sharing ideas over a cup of coffee is part of a tradition that's hundreds of years old. You're participating in the legacy of London's penny universities, where for the price of a drink, you could gain a world of knowledge. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more dives into the hidden histories that shape our world. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below and let us know your favorite cafe or a topic you'd like us to cover next. Until next time, stay curious. Take a moment and picture your favorite coffee shop. What do you see? People typing away on laptops, friends catching up over lattes, maybe someone quietly reading in a corner. It feels like a modern invention, right? A staple of our fast-paced lives. But what if I told you that the coffee house as we know it is a centuries-old institution, a place that has been the backdrop for revolutions, artistic masterpieces, and profound social change? Today, we're pouring a fresh cup and diving deep into the fascinating history of the café. We'll trace its journey from the bustling markets of the Ottoman Empire, where it first emerged as a public space for men to gather, talk politics, and enjoy this new, energizing beverage to its arrival in Europe, where it completely transformed the social landscape. Our story begins in the 16th century, in cities like Constantinople and Cairo. Before coffee houses, social life was often confined to the home, the mosque, or the tavern. The coffee house, or café cane, offered something entirely new. It was a secular space, fueled not by alcohol, but by caffeine. This simple shift had a huge impact. Instead of drunken brawls, you had lively debates. News, gossip, and business deals were exchanged over small, strong cups of coffee. These places became known as schools of the wise because they were vibrant centers of information and intellectual exchange. Merchants, scholars, and officials all gathered here, making them the nerve centers of the city. When European travelers and merchants experienced this culture, they were captivated. They brought back not just the coffee beans, but the very idea of the coffee house. London was one of the first European cities to fall in love with coffee. The first one opened in 1652, and within a few decades there were hundreds. London's coffee houses were nicknamed penny universities Because for the price of a cup of coffee, just 1 penny, you could access a world of knowledge. Each coffee house had its own unique character, attracting specific crowds. You had places for scientists, for poets, for financiers. In fact, institutions like the London Stock Exchange and Lloyd's of London can trace their origins back to conversations that happened in specific coffee houses. Then we crossed the channel to Paris, where the café became the salon of the Enlightenment. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot practically lived in places like Café Procope. Here, over countless cups of coffee, they debated the very foundations of society, questioning monarchy, religion, and human rights. The ideas that would fuel the French Revolution were sharpened and spread within these walls. The Parisian café was a stage for intellectual performance, a place where ideas could be tested, refined, and shared with a rapidly growing literate public. It was the social media of its day, a breeding ground for radical thought and political dissent. But no city embraced and elevated the coffee house quite like Vienna. Let's travel to the heart of the Habsburg Empire, where the café became not just a place to visit, but a way of life, a culture so unique it's now recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage. Picture this: you step off a grand Viennese boulevard and into a world of timeless elegance. You're greeted by the hushed clinking of porcelain and silver. The air smells of rich coffee, warm pastries, and old newsprint. You're guided to a small, marble-topped table by a formally dressed waiter, the Herr Ober, who addresses you with polite deference. This is the Viennese coffee house. Unlike the bustling, quick-turnover cafes of today, the Viennese coffee house was designed for lingering. It was conceived as an extension of the living room, a public living room where you could spend an entire day for the price of a single coffee. And that coffee would arrive on a silver tray, always accompanied by a glass of cold water, a practice that signifies the host has hospitality and your right to stay as long as you wish. The waiter would replenish your water glass throughout the day, a silent invitation to relax and feel at home. The tables are often adorned with a Zeitungsstände, a wooden rack holding a wide selection of local and international newspapers. This tradition turned the coffee house into an information hub, a place where you could stay connected with the world without having to purchase every paper. You could read, write letters, play chess, or simply sit and watch the world go by. The atmosphere was one of contemplative calm, a sanctuary from the stresses of daily life, and the coffee itself? Viennese coffee culture is a universe of its own. You don't just order coffee. You might ask for a meringue, similar to a cappuccino, but often topped with milk foam. Or perhaps an entspanner, a strong black coffee served in a glass with a generous dollop of whipped cream, known as Schlagerbus. The cream served a practical purpose. Carriage drivers, the Geinspanner, could hold the hot glass, and the cream would keep the coffee warm and prevent it from spilling. Each drink tells a story, a little piece of the city's history. This unique environment nurtured an incredible explosion of creativity. At the turn of the 20th century, Vienna's coffee houses were the unofficial headquarters for the city's intellectual and artistic elite. Writers like Stefan Zweig and Arthur Schnitzler penned their masterpieces here. Artists like Gustav Klimt and Egon Schiele sketched out their revolutionary ideas. Architects, musicians, and even psychoanalysts like Sigmund Freud were all part of this vibrant coffeehouse scene. PLACEES like Café Central and Café Greenstidel were battlegrounds of ideas where modernism was born over strudel and whipped cream. It was a space where you could be alone, yet surrounded by the stimulating energy of others. The Viennese coffeehouse ritual is a celebration of Gemütlichkeit, a hard-to-translate German word that embodies a feeling of coziness, warmth, and unhurried contentment. It's a philosophy of slowing down, of savoring the moment, and of appreciating the simple, elegant pleasures of life. It's a deliberate act of resistance against the rush of the modern world. Even today, stepping into a traditional Viennese café feels like stepping back in time, preserving a culture of slow social interaction that feels more valuable than ever. From the political debates in 16th century Constantinople to the intellectual revolutions in Paris and the quiet, creative contemplation in Vienna, the coffee house has always been more than just a place to get a drink. It's a stage, a sanctuary, and a catalyst for change. It's a testament to the power of a simple space where people can gather, talk, and dream. So the next time you're sipping your flat white, take a moment to appreciate the rich, complex history swirling in your cup. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. If you enjoyed this little slice of history, please give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next adventure. What's your favorite thing about your local coffee shop? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone! Have you ever sat in a cafe, maybe with a laptop or a good book, and just felt that unique buzz in the air? That's not just the caffeine, you know. You're tapping into a tradition that is centuries old, a history where coffee houses were the epicenters of thought, creativity, and even revolution. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating chapters of this story. How the humble café became the crucible of the Enlightenment. So grab your favorite mug, get comfortable, and let's journey back in time. Our story begins in the 17th century as coffee, this exotic, dark, and stimulating beverage from the Ottoman Empire, started making its way across Europe. Before coffee, the most common social drink was alcohol. Think about it. Taverns and alehouses were the norm. While fun, they weren't exactly places for sharp, intellectual debate. Alcohol tends to cloud the mind, but coffee did the opposite. It sharpened the senses, awakened the mind, and kept people talking for hours. When the first coffee houses opened in cities like London, Paris, and Vienna, they offered a completely new kind of social space. Unlike the exclusive aristocratic salons or the rowdy taverns, coffee houses were surprisingly democratic. For the price of a single cup of coffee, a penny in many London establishments, you could gain entry. This earned them the nickname penny universities. Suddenly, a merchant could be sitting next to a poet, a scientist could be debating a politician, and a student could listen in on the greatest minds of the age. This was revolutionary. For the first time, social status mattered less than the quality of your ideas. People from different walks of life weren't just coexisting. They were interacting, debating, and sharing knowledge. The coffee house became a public sphere, a neutral ground where conversation was the main currency. Newspapers were made available for everyone to read, fostering a more informed public. Imagine, instead of scrolling through a newsfeed, you'd pick up a freshly printed gazette and discuss the headlines with the people around you. This new environment was the perfect breeding ground for the Enlightenment, an intellectual and cultural movement that championed reason, logic, and individual liberty over tradition and absolute authority. The very air in these coffee houses crackled with new ideas. Philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau were famous patrons of Parisian cafés like the Procope. Here, over steaming cups of coffee, they would discuss and refine the very principles that would go on to inspire both the American and French revolutions. Ideas about democracy, human rights, and the separation of powers weren't just born in dusty libraries. They were debated, challenged, and polished in the lively, smoke-filled rooms of coffee houses. Let's talk about the specific kind of conversation that flourished here. It wasn't just idle gossip. The culture of the coffee house encouraged reasoned argument and civility. There were even posted rules in some establishments, discouraging swearing, loud arguments, and quarrels. The goal was rational discourse. This was a place to test your theories, to learn from others, and to engage with the world in a new, more analytical way. Think of it as the original internet forum, but face-to-face and with much better coffee. These hubs of intellect weren't limited to philosophy and politics. They were also crucial for science and commerce. The Royal Society in London, one of the world's oldest and most prestigious scientific institutions, essentially grew out of coffeehouse meetings. Scientists would gather to discuss experiments, share discoveries, and challenge established theories. Similarly, in the financial district of London, merchants and ship captains gathered in coffeehouses like Edward Lloyd's. These meetings were so central to business that Lloyd's Coffee House eventually evolved into the world-renowned insurance market, Lloyd's of London, all from conversations over coffee. Art and literature also found a home in the cafe. Writers would find inspiration, meet publishers, and critique each other's work. The first literary magazines were passed around and discussed here. The cafe became a stage for the creative spirit. a place where a struggling poet could get feedback or a playwright could gauge the public's mood. It was an ecosystem of creativity, fueled by caffeine and conversation. So, what happened? Why don't we still call them penny universities? As the 18th century progressed, society began to change. Exclusive gentlemen's clubs started to replace the more democratic coffeehouses for the elite. The rise of the home as a private sanctuary also shifted social habits. But the spirit of the coffeehouse never truly died. It simply evolved. The bohemian cafés of 19th century Paris and Vienna carried the torch, becoming havens for artists and thinkers like Picasso and Freud. And in the 20th century, the Beat Generation writers found their voice in the cafés of New York and San Francisco. The legacy is undeniable. The modern café, with its free Wi-Fi, community tables, and buzzing atmosphere, is the direct descendant of those 17th century hubs of enlightenment. So the next time you step into your favorite coffee shop, take a moment to look around. You are part of a long, proud tradition. A tradition of open conversation, of shared ideas, and of gentle, slow, social change brewing one cup at a time. The café isn't just a place to get a caffeine fix. It's a space where society can think, connect, and grow. It's where revolutions, both big and small, can begin. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical journey today. What does the café mean to you? Is it a place for work, for meeting friends, or for quiet reflection? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more fascinating stories from history, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. It really helps us out. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're continuing our journey through the history of the café, and we've reached a truly pivotal moment. For centuries, the coffeehouse was largely a man's world, a place for business, politics, and intellectual sparring among gentlemen. But the winds of change were blowing, and the aroma of coffee was about to mingle with the fight for equality. So, grab your favorite mug, get comfortable, and let us explore how women finally broke through the doors and claimed their place at the café table. It's hard to imagine our modern coffee shops without women, isn't it? But for a very long time, respectable women were actively discouraged, and in many places, outright banned from entering coffeehouses. These establishments were seen as dens of vice, political radicalism, and male gossip, hardly a suitable environment for a proper lady. In London, for instance, a 1674 pamphlet titled The Women's Petition Against Coffee, humorously, or maybe not so humorously, complained that coffee made men unfruitful and led them to abandon their domestic duties to waste time in cafes. While this was likely satire, it reflected a real anxiety about the coffeehouse's influence on traditional gender roles. So, how did this start to change? Well, it wasn't an overnight revolution. It was a slow, gradual shift, happening at different speeds in different parts of the world. One of the first and most important battlegrounds was Paris. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Parisian cafés began to evolve. Unlike their London counterparts, many Parisian cafés had outdoor terraces. This simple architectural feature was a game changer. It made the café a more public, visible, and less intimidating space. A woman could sit at an outdoor table, often with a male companion or in a group, without having to enter the smoky, male-dominated interior. It was a small step, but it was a step toward public visibility. The rise of the grand cafés in cities like Paris and Vienna during the 19th century also played a crucial role. These were not small, dark rooms, but opulent, palace-like establishments with chandeliers, marble tables, and professional waiters. Think of Café Central in Vienna or Café de la Paix in Paris. Their grandeur and elegance made them feel more respectable and less threatening. They became destinations for the burgeoning middle class, and it became fashionable for families, including wives and daughters, to frequent them, especially in the afternoons for coffee and cake. It was a new form of respectable leisure. But the real turning point came with the rise of social and political movements led by women. As the 19th century progressed, the fight for women's suffrage and other rights gained momentum. Women needed places to meet, organize, and strategize away from the confines of the home, And where better than the café? It was a neutral public space where they could gather without a formal invitation. The café became an unofficial headquarters for a new generation of female activists, writers, artists, and thinkers. In places like Greenwich Village in New York and Montmartre in Paris in the early 20th century, bohemian cafés became havens for new women, independent, educated, and career-oriented women who rejected traditional constraints. Here, they weren't just decorative additions. They were active participants in the intellectual and artistic life of the city. They debated politics, shared their poetry, and formulated ideas that would challenge the status quo. These cafes provided a crucial support network, a space where their voices could be heard and their ambitions taken seriously. Think of figures like Simone de Beauvoir, who famously wrote and held court in the cafes of Paris's left bank, like Les Deux Magots. For her and many others, the café was an extension of her study and her salon, a place of intellectual freedom. This slow shift wasn't without its struggles, of course. Women in cafes often faced scrutiny, judgment, and harassment. A woman sitting alone was often viewed with suspicion. But their persistence was remarkable. They carved out a space for themselves, one cup of coffee at a time. They demonstrated that a woman's place was not just in the home, but also in the public sphere, participating in the conversations that shape society. The inclusion of women didn't just change the café. It enriched it. It broadened the range of conversations, introduced new perspectives, and made the coffee house a more complete reflection of society. The café, as evolution from an exclusive men's club to a more inclusive social hub, is a powerful story about social change. It shows how a simple public space can become a stage for the fight for equality and visibility. It's a testament to the brave women who dared to push open those doors and demand their seat at the table. And that's where we'll leave it for today. The story of the café is a story of all of us, and understanding how it became a space for everyone makes that next cup of coffee taste just a little bit richer. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical journey. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter in our series. What do you think about the role of cafes in social change? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever sat in a cafe, maybe with a laptop or a book, and just felt that creative spark? That feeling isn't new. For centuries, the humble coffee house has been much more than just a place to get a caffeine fix. It's been a stage, a studio, and a sanctuary for some of the world's greatest artistic minds. Today, let's pull back the velvet curtain and explore how the cafe became the ultimate muse for painters, poets, and musicians. Our story begins not with a grand orchestra, but with the quiet clinking of porcelain and the low hum of conversation. When coffee houses first emerged, they offered something revolutionary, a public space that wasn't a rowdy tavern or an exclusive aristocratic salon. It was a neutral ground, a third place between home and work, where for the price of a single cup of coffee, you could sit for hours. This simple transaction was a game changer. It democratized social life and, in doing so, created the perfect environment for artists. Think about it from a painter's perspective. In the 17th and 18th centuries, artists were often confined to their studios or reliant on wealthy patrons. The café offered a window to the world. Here they could observe real life unfolding, the animated gestures of a debate, the weary posture of a worker, the flirtatious glance between two lovers. These weren't staged poses. They were authentic slices of humanity. The café became a living sketchbook. Artists like Edouard Manet and Edgar Degas would later immortalize these scenes, capturing the unique atmosphere of Parisian café life, turning fleeting moments into timeless masterpieces. The dim, smoky lighting, the reflections in the mirrors, the diverse cast of characters, it was all raw material for their canvases. For writers and poets, the café was an intellectual battleground and a collaborative workspace. Imagine the cafes of Paris in the early 20th century. You might see Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir hunched over a table at Les Deux Magots, forging the philosophy of existentialism between sips of coffee. A few tables over, James Joyce could be painstakingly crafting a sentence for Ulysses *. The café provided the ideal blend of solitude and society. You could be alone with your thoughts, yet surrounded by the energizing buzz of others. This creative friction was electric. Ideas weren't just born here. They were debated, refined, and challenged. Poems were read aloud, manuscripts were exchanged, and entire literary movements, from surrealism to the Beat Generation, were fueled by caffeine and conversation. The café was their open-source think tank. And what about the musicians? Long before the era of grand concert halls and Spotify playlists, the café was a vital performance venue. A musician with a guitar or an accordion could find a captive, if informal, audience. These weren't just gigs. They were intimate exchanges between the artist and the listener. The café was where folk songs telling tales of love and protest found their voice. It's where the seeds of jazz began to sprout in cities like New Orleans and Paris, with improvisation echoing the spontaneous nature of café conversations. The raw, unfiltered acoustics of the room, combined with the close proximity of the audience, created a powerful, personal connection that a larger venue could never replicate. The applause wasn't just for the performance. It was for a shared moment of human expression. But why the café? What was its secret ingredient besides the coffee itself? It was the unique culture of slow sociality. Unlike a modern fast food joint, the café encouraged you to linger. There was no pressure to eat and leave. This culture of patience created a space for deep thought and observation. In a quiet corner, an artist could sit undisturbed for hours, letting their mind wander, waiting for inspiration to strike. The world outside could be frantic and demanding, but inside the café, time seemed to slow down. This temporal bubble was essential for the creative process, which rarely adheres to a strict schedule. It allowed for the serendipitous encounter, the unexpected idea, the gradual unfolding of a masterpiece. Even the physical layout of the café played a role. Small round tables encouraged intimate conversation, while also allowing for a sense of personal space. The placement of mirrors made the rooms feel larger and more dynamic, allowing patrons to subtly observe one another. The aroma of roasted coffee beans and pastries created a comforting sensory experience that put people at ease. Every detail, from the hiss of the espresso machine to the worn velvet on the banquettes, contributed to an environment that was both stimulating and soothing, the perfect paradox for a creative mind. From the Impressionist painters capturing the fleeting light of a Parisian afternoon, to the beat poets hammering out revolutionary verses in Greenwich Village, to the folk singers strumming chords of change, the café has been a silent partner in their creative journey. It was a place of refuge, a source of inspiration, and a community hub all rolled into one. It wasn't just about the coffee. It was about the culture that grew up around it, a culture of observation, conversation, and slow, deliberate creation. So the next time you find yourself in a cafe, take a moment. Look around at the faces, listen to the murmur of conversations, and feel the creative energy that is soaked into the very walls for centuries. You're part of a long and beautiful tradition, and who knows? Maybe your next great idea is just one cup of coffee away. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey through artistic history. If you enjoyed this exploration, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories about the hidden histories that shape our world. We'd love to have you in our community. See you in the next video. Have you ever sat in a cafe, maybe with a book or your laptop, and just felt that creative energy buzzing around you? That perfect blend of background chatter, the aroma of brewing coffee, and the quiet intensity of people working, talking, and thinking. It's no accident. For centuries, cafes have been more than just places to get a caffeine fix. They've been the unofficial headquarters for artists, writers, revolutionaries, and thinkers. Today, we're diving deep into the history of the cafe, specifically how these humble coffee houses transformed into the vibrant salons and creative hubs that shaped our modern world. So grab your favorite mug, get comfortable, and let's explore how the cafe became the ultimate stage for conversation, art, and slow, powerful social change. The story really takes off in the 17th and 18th centuries, especially in cities like Paris and London. Before this, social life often revolved around taverns, where alcohol fueled loud and often rowdy gatherings. But coffee offered something different. It was a stimulant, not a depressant. It sharpened the mind, encouraging clarity, debate, and intellectual curiosity. Suddenly, you had a space where people from different walks of life, merchants, scholars, poets, and politicians, could gather on a more or less equal footing. The price of a cup of coffee was the price of admission to a world of new ideas. These weren't just places to drink. They were penny universities, where for the cost of a coffee, you could listen to and participate in the most brilliant conversations of the day. This new environment was a perfect breeding ground for the Enlightenment. Thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau practically lived in Parisian cafés like Café Procope, which opened its doors in 1686 and is still operating today. Imagine them hunched over a small table, debating the very nature of human rights, government, and society, with nothing but an espresso to fuel their intellectual fire. These discussions weren't just idle chatter. The ideas debated in these smoky, crowded rooms would spill out onto the streets and eventually fuel revolutions, inspiring documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The café became a public sphere, a third place between home and work where public opinion was forged, one cup at a time. As we move into the 19th and early 20th centuries, the café's role evolved, becoming the beating heart of the artistic avant-garde. Paris, once again, was the epicenter. The cafés of Montmartre and Montparnasse were the chosen homes for a new generation of painters, writers, and poets who were breaking all the old rules. Artists like Picasso, Modigliani, and Hemingway weren't just patrons, they were fixtures. They used cafés as their offices, their meeting rooms, and sometimes even their canteens. A struggling artist could nurse a single coffee for hours, sketching in a notebook, soaking in the atmosphere, and, most importantly, connecting with other creative minds. Picture this: Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque sit at a table, passionately discussing the fractured, multi-dimensional perspectives that would become Cubism. Or Ernest Hemingway, jotting down the sparse, powerful sentences of "The sun also rises" in a notebook at La Closerie des Lilas. These cafés weren't just backdrops. They were active participants in the creative process. The constant flow of people, the intense debates about art and life, the sheer energy of it all seeped into their work. Deals were made, collaborations were born, and entire artistic movements found their voice within the four walls of a café. They offered a unique combination of solitude and society, allowing an artist to be alone with their thoughts while still feeling part of a larger, vibrant community. But why the café? Why not a library or private studio? A huge part of the appeal was accessibility and a sense of shared experience. Unlike formal salons held in private, aristocratic homes, the café was democratic. It was a place where a penniless poet could overhear a conversation that might spark their next masterpiece, or a young painter could show their work to a potential patron who just happened to be sitting at the next table. This created an incredible cross-pollination of ideas. A musician might be inspired by a poet's reading, who in turn was inspired by a painter's latest canvas, which was propped up against a chair in the corner. This constant exchange, this intellectual and artistic ferment, was the magic ingredient that made cafés so vital. This legacy continues today. While the specific artists and thinkers may have changed, the fundamental spirit of the café as a creative hub endures. All around the world, you'll find freelancers typing away on their next big project, students debating philosophy, and friends sketching out business plans on napkins. We might have Wi-Fi and oat milk lattes now, but that core function remains the same. The café is a space for connection, concentration, and creation. It's a place where we can be alone together, participating in a tradition that stretches back centuries. It's a testament to the simple, enduring power of a shared space and a good cup of coffee. The next time you walk into your favorite café, take a moment to look around. You're not just buying a drink. You're stepping into a living, breathing piece of cultural history. And that's the beautiful story of how coffeehouses became the world's creative living rooms. What started as a place for a new and exotic beverage became the engine for some of history's greatest intellectual and artistic shifts. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through time. If you found this as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories about the hidden histories that shape our world. I'd love to hear about your favorite cafe experiences in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever sat in a cafe, watched the staff glide between tables, and wondered how this whole dance came to be? The crisp aprons, the polite inquiries, the unspoken rules of service. It wasn't always like this. Today, we're diving into the fascinating history of cafe service, exploring how the humble coffee house transformed into the stage for quiet, choreographed performance that shaped how we interact in public spaces. This is the story of the rise of the waiter, the invention of cafe etiquette, and the subtle art of service that we often take for granted. Let's rewind to the early days of coffee houses in the 17th and 18th centuries. Places like the famous cafés of London, Paris, and Vienna were buzzing, chaotic hubs of intellectual and social exchange, but the service, it was often, let's say, informal. The owner, or perhaps a family member, would be behind a counter, serving up coffee in a bustling, often smoky room. There was little distinction between staff and patron, and the concept of a dedicated waiter as we know was virtually non-existent. You'd jostle for a spot, shout your order, and hope for the best. It was raw, energetic, and a far cry from the refined experience many of us seek today. The focus was purely on the coffee and the conversation, not the comfort or elegance of its delivery. So, when did the shift happen? The real transformation began in the 19th century, especially in the grand cafés of Paris and Vienna. As these establishments grew in size and ambition, they needed to manage a larger, more discerning clientele. The chaotic self-service model was no longer sustainable. This necessity gave birth to the professional waiter. But simply hiring more people wasn't enough. To create an atmosphere of order, sophistication, and efficiency, a system was needed. And that system started with the uniform. The introduction of the waiter's uniform was a stroke of genius. It wasn't just about looking smart. It was a powerful visual cue. Suddenly, there was a clear distinction between the server and the served. The classic black and white attire, the crisp white shirt, the black waistcoat or trousers, and the long white apron projected an image of professionalism, cleanliness, and discipline. It communicated to the customer, "I am here to serve you. You are in a well-run establishment." This simple change elevated the status of both the cafe and the waiter, turning a simple job into a respected profession. The uniform became a symbol of the café's commitment to quality service, an instant signifier of a certain standard. With a uniformed staff in place, the next logical step was to standardize their behavior. This is where the choreography of service truly begins. Cafe owners and managers started to develop specific rules of etiquette for their staff. This wasn't just about being polite. It was a detailed set of instructions on how to move, how to speak, and how to anticipate a customer's needs without being intrusive. Waiters were trained to approach a table with a certain posture, to take an order without interrupting a conversation, and to place a cup and saucer on the table just so, handle facing right, spoon placed neatly alongside. Think about it. The waiter who refills your water glass without you asking, the one who clears plates discreetly, the one who knows just when to present the bill. This isn't just good luck. It's the legacy of a carefully developed system. This quiet choreography was designed to make the customer's experience as seamless and pleasant as possible. It created a bubble of comfort and civility, allowing patrons to focus on their conversations, their reading, or their creative work, knowing that their needs would be met almost magically. The best service became invisible service. The cafe transformed from a place you went to get coffee into a place you went to be served coffee. This new level of service also had a profound impact on the customers themselves. The formal, respectful environment curated by the waiters encouraged a new code of conduct among the patrons. You couldn't just shout across the room anymore. The refined atmosphere demanded a more subdued, courteous behavior. People began to speak more quietly, to wait their turn patiently, and to treat the staff with a newfound respect. The cafe became a training ground for public etiquette, teaching a generation how to behave in these new shared social spaces. The physical environment, the marble-top tables, the plush seating, the uniformed staff all contributed to a sense of occasion, influencing patrons to rise to it. This meticulous service model reached its zenith in the grand Viennese coffeehouses, where waiters or Herr Ober were figures of immense authority and skill. They were known for their impeccable memory, their formal demeanor, and their ability to manage a dozen tables with unflappable grace. They were the conductors of the café orchestra, ensuring every element worked in perfect harmony. Being a waiter in one of these establishments was a lifelong career, a craft honed over decades. They weren't just serving coffee. They were upholding a culture, a tradition of hospitality that made these coffee houses legendary. Of course, café culture has continued to evolve. Today, the style of service can vary dramatically. From the ultra-formal traditions still found in some historic European cafés to the friendly, first-name basis informality of your local neighborhood spot. The uniform might be a branded t-shirt and a denim apron, and the etiquette might be more relaxed. But the core principles remain the same. The goal is still to create a welcoming space where people can connect, relax, and enjoy a moment of respite. The choreography has changed its steps, but the dance continues. The next time you're in a cafe, take a moment to look beyond your latte. Notice the way the staff moves, the way they interact with customers, the small gestures that create a seamless experience. You're witnessing the legacy of a quiet revolution, a history written not in books, but in the subtle choreography of service. It's a performance that has been refined for over 200 years, all to perfect the simple, wonderful act of enjoying a cup of coffee. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the history of the cafe. If you found this as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories about the hidden histories that shape our world. We love reading your comments, so please share your own cafe experiences or observations down below. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever sat in a cafe and just looked around? Not at your phone, but at the actual space itself. The way the light hits the worn wooden tables, the gentle curve of a chair's backrest, the cool, smooth surface of a marble countertop. Have you ever wondered why so many cafes, from Paris to Prague, from Vienna to your own neighborhood, share this same, almost timeless aesthetic? It's not an accident. Every element, from the bentwood chairs to the low lighting, is part of a long and fascinating story. It's the story of how a simple beverage, coffee, created a revolutionary new space, the coffee house. A space that would become the crucible for conversation, art, and even slow, simmering social change. Today, we're going to peel back the layers of history and design to understand how the humble cafe became the world's living room. So let's start with the basics. What makes a cafe a cafe? It's more than just a place that sells coffee. It's a third place, a term coined by sociologist Ray Oldenburg. It's not home and it's not work. It's a neutral ground where people can gather, linger, and interact. This idea started centuries ago in the bustling coffee houses of the Ottoman Empire. Imagine 16th century Constantinople. Merchants, scholars, and artisans would gather in these new establishments, sipping strong, dark coffee from small cups. Here, for the price of a coffee, you could access information, debate politics, listen to poetry, and conduct business. It was a radical idea, a public space where social status was, for a moment, less important than the quality of your conversation. This spirit of open discourse and intellectual exchange became the very foundation of cafe culture. When coffee arrived in Europe in the 17th century, it brought this culture with it. London's first coffee houses, which popped up in the 1650s, were nicknamed penny universities. Why? Because for the price of a penny for a cup of coffee, you could sit for hours and listen to the brightest minds of the age, debate everything from science to shipping routes. Thinkers like Isaac Newton, writers like Alexander Pope, and merchants from the newly formed Lloyd's of London insurance market all frequented these smoky, energetic rooms. They weren't just drinking coffee. They were building the intellectual framework of the modern world. It was in these establishments that ideas were tested, newspapers were born, and public opinion began to take shape, all fueled by caffeine and conversation. But a space for thinking needs a certain kind of design, doesn't it? It needs to be comfortable enough to stay for hours, but not so comfortable that you fall asleep. It needs to feel public, yet offer a sense of private intimacy. This is where the deliberate design of the café truly begins to shine, and perhaps no one understood this better than the Viennese. Vienna's coffeehouse culture, which blossomed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, elevated the café to an art form. The grand Viennese café house was designed to be an extension of your own home, but better. Plush seating, newspapers on wooden racks, and impeccably dressed waiters who would never dream of rushing you. And at the heart of this design was a simple, elegant piece of furniture, the bentwood chair. Specifically Michael Thont's chair No. 14. You know this chair, even if you don't know its name. It's the classic, light, curvaceous chair you see in cafes all over the world. Patented in 1859, it was a marvel of industrial design. Thont figured out how to use steam to bend solid beechwood into graceful curves. The result was a chair that was strong, lightweight, affordable to mass-produce, and beautiful. It was the perfect café chair. It was comfortable enough for long conversations, light enough to be moved around easily to accommodate a new friend joining the table, and its elegant, simple lines didn't clutter the room. The bentwood chair didn't just furnish the café. It helped define its fluid social nature. Alongside the chair, another key element emerged: the marble-topped table. Why marble? It's practical for one. It's cool to the touch, easy to clean, and durable enough to withstand countless clinking cups and spilled drinks. But it's also about aesthetics. The smooth veined surface of a marble tabletop reflects the light, adding a touch of brightness and elegance to the room. It creates a small, defined personal space for your cup, your notebook, or your newspaper. Think of the classic Parisian café scene: a small round marble table, a couple of bentwood chairs, an espresso, a croissant. It's an iconic image, a perfect little stage for the daily drama of city life. The combination of the warm, organic wood of the chair and the cool, solid stone of the table creates a beautiful sensory balance. It's a design language that says, stay a while. This space is for you. The overall atmosphere is crafted with just as much care. Caf designers are masters of subtle psychology. The lighting is often warm and focused, creating intimate pools of light around tables rather than flooding the entire room. This encourages conversation and makes you feel like you're in your own little world, even in a crowded space. The layout is also crucial. It's rarely a rigid grid. Instead, you'll find a mix of small tables for two, larger communal tables, and cozy nooks with armchairs. This variety allows for different kinds of social interaction, from a private chat to a lively group discussion, or even solitary work. The gentle hum of the espresso machine, the clatter of cups, the low murmur of conversation, it all blends into a unique soundscape, a background noise that's both energizing and soothing, known as the coffee shop effect. Studies have shown this ambient noise can actually boost creativity. So the next time you walk into a cafe, take a moment. Notice the curve of the chair you're about to sit in. Run your hand over the cool surface of the table. Look at how the light falls. You're not just in a shop that sells coffee. You're participating in a tradition that's hundreds of years old. You're sitting in a space meticulously designed to foster comfort, conversation, and creativity. From the revolutionary debates in 17th century London to the artistic masterpieces sketched on napkins in 20th century Paris, the café has always been more than the sum of its parts. It's a testament to the power of a simple, shared space to bring people together and, cup by cup, slowly and quietly change the world. It's a history you can see, feel, and even taste. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the history and design of the café. If you enjoyed this, please give this video a like and consider subscribing for more stories about the hidden designs that shape our world. We love hearing your thoughts, so let us know your favorite cafe or a memorable cafe experience in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever sat in a cafe, watched the staff glide between tables, and wondered how this whole dance came to be? The crisp aprons, the polite inquiries, the unspoken rules of service. It wasn't always like this. Today, we're diving into the fascinating history of cafe service. exploring how the humble coffeehouse transformed into the stage for quiet, choreographed performance that shaped how we interact in public spaces. This is the story of the rise of the waiter, the invention of cafe etiquette, and the subtle art of service that we often take for granted. Let's rewind to the early days of coffeehouses in the 17th and 18th centuries. Places like the famous cafés of London, Paris, and Vienna were buzzing, chaotic hubs of intellectual and social exchange, but the service, it was often, let's say, informal. The owner, or perhaps a family member, would be behind a counter, serving up coffee in a bustling, often smoky room. There was little distinction between staff and patron, and the concept of a dedicated waiter as we know was virtually non-existent. You'd jostle for a spot, shout your order, and hope for the best. It was raw, energetic, and a far cry from the refined experience many of us seek today. The focus was purely on the coffee and the conversation, not the comfort or elegance of its delivery. So, when did the shift happen? The real transformation began in the 19th century, especially in the grand cafés of Paris and Vienna. As these establishments grew in size and ambition, they needed to manage a larger, more discerning clientele. The chaotic self-service model was no longer sustainable. This necessity gave birth to the professional waiter. But simply hiring more people wasn't enough. To create an atmosphere of order, sophistication, and efficiency, a system was needed. And that system started with the uniform. The introduction of the waiter's uniform was a stroke of genius. It wasn't just about looking smart. It was a powerful visual cue. Suddenly, there was a clear distinction between the server and the served. The classic black and white attire, the crisp white shirt, the black waistcoat or trousers, and the long white apron projected an image of professionalism, cleanliness, and discipline. It communicated to the customer, "I am here to serve you. You are in a well-run establishment." This simple change elevated the status of both the café and the waiter, turning a simple job into a respected profession. The uniform became a symbol of the café's commitment to quality service, an instant signifier of a certain standard. With a uniformed staff in place, the next logical step was to standardize their behavior. This is where the choreography of service truly begins. Cafe owners and managers started to develop specific rules of etiquette for their staff. This wasn't just about being polite. It was a detailed set of instructions on how to move, how to speak, and how to anticipate a customer's needs without being intrusive. Waiters were trained to approach a table with a certain posture, to take an order without interrupting a conversation, and to place a cup and saucer on the table just so, handle facing right, spoon placed neatly alongside. Think about it. The waiter who refills your water glass without you asking, the one who clears plates discreetly, the one who knows just when to present the bill. This isn't just good luck. It's the legacy of a carefully developed system. This quiet choreography was designed to make the customer's experience as seamless and pleasant as possible. It created a bubble of comfort and civility, allowing patrons to focus on their conversations, their reading, or their creative work, knowing that their needs would be met almost magically. The best service became invisible service. The café transformed from a place you went to get coffee into a place you went to be served coffee. This new level of service also had a profound impact on the customers themselves. The formal, respectful environment curated by the waiters encouraged a new code of conduct among the patrons. You couldn't just shout across the room anymore. The refined atmosphere demanded a more subdued, courteous behavior. People began to speak more quietly, to wait their turn patiently, and to treat the staff with a newfound respect. The café became a training ground for public etiquette, teaching a generation how to behave in these new shared social spaces. The physical environment, the marble-top tables, the plush seating, the uniformed staff all contributed to a sense of occasion, influencing patrons to rise to it. This meticulous service model reached its zenith in the grand Viennese coffeehouses, where waiters, or Herr Ober, were figures of immense authority and skill. They were known for their impeccable memory, their formal demeanor, and their ability to manage a dozen tables with unflappable grace. They were the conductors of the café orchestra, ensuring every element worked in perfect harmony. Being a waiter in one of these establishments was a lifelong career, a craft honed over decades. They weren't just serving coffee. They were upholding a culture, a tradition of hospitality that made these coffee houses legendary. Of course, café culture has continued to evolve. Today, the style of service can vary dramatically. From the ultra-formal traditions still found in some historic European cafés to the friendly, first-name basis informality of your local neighborhood spot. The uniform might be a branded t-shirt and a denim apron, and the etiquette might be more relaxed. But the core principles remain the same. The goal is still to create a welcoming space where people can connect, relax, and enjoy a moment of respite. The choreography has changed its steps, but the dance continues. The next time you're in a cafe, take a moment to look beyond your latte. Notice the way the staff moves, the way they interact with customers, the small gestures that create a seamless experience. You're witnessing the legacy of a quiet revolution, a history written not in books, but in the subtle choreography of service. It's a performance that has been refined for over 200 years, all to perfect the simple, wonderful act of enjoying a cup of coffee. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the history of the cafe. If you found this as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories about the hidden histories that shape our world. We love reading your comments, so please share your own cafe experiences or observations down below. Until next time, stay curious. Ever wondered how your favorite cafe got that sprawling menu? It wasn't always about flat whites and avocado toast. Let's journey back in time to the very first coffee houses. Picture this, 16th century Constantinople. The air is thick with the rich dark aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The menu, it's simple. Just coffee. Served black, strong, and unfiltered, often in small, handleless cups. The focus wasn't on a fancy drink. It was on the brew itself, a powerful new elixir that fueled conversation and intellectual debate. There were no pastries, no sandwiches, just the pure, unadulterated experience of coffee. As these coffee houses, or café cane, spread across the Ottoman Empire, they became the original social network. They were nicknamed schools of the wise because they were places where people from all walks of life, merchants, scholars, artisans could gather. They'd play chess, listen to music and storytellers, and, most importantly, talk. They discussed politics, business, and philosophy, all over a simple cup of coffee. The drink was the catalyst, the social lubricant for a new kind of public sphere. Food was an afterthought, something you ate before you arrived or after you left. The star of the show was the coffee and the community it created. When coffee finally arrived in Europe in the 17th century, it brought this tradition with it. The first European coffee houses, from Venice to London and Paris, were direct descendants of their Middle Eastern counterparts. In London, they were called penny universities because for the price of a penny, you could get a cup of coffee and access to a world of information, newspapers, and stimulating debate. The menu remained sparse. You get your coffee and maybe a clay pipe to smoke some tobacco. That was it. The environment was the main course. But as competition grew, coffeehouse owners needed to stand out. This is where the first glimmers of a menu begin to appear. In Paris, the famous Café Procope, which opened in 1686, started offering something new alongside its coffee. Sorbet, an icy treat that was a novelty at the time. This was a game changer. It showed that a coffee house could be a destination for more than just a caffeine fix. It could be a place for indulgence, a treat. This simple addition marked the beginning of the cafe as a place for culinary delights, not just intellectual ones. The 18th and 19th centuries saw this idea blossom, especially in the grand coffee houses of Vienna. This is where the cafe menu truly came into its own. Viennese Kaffhäuser became opulent, comfortable spaces designed to make you stay for hours. To encourage this, they didn't just serve coffee. They created a whole experience around it. They started serving it on a silver tray, accompanied by a glass of cold water, a practice that continues today. And more importantly, they introduced pastries, the iconic Sachertorte, the delicate Apfelstrudel. These weren't just snacks. They were works of art, designed to complement the coffee and elevate the entire experience. The café became a place for gemütlichkeit, a cozy, leisurely sense of well-being. Back in Paris, the café was evolving in a similar direction. Boulangeries and patisseries were already a core part of French culture, and it was only natural for them to merge with the coffee house. Soon the aroma of coffee was mingling with the scent of freshly baked croissants and pains au chocolate. This was a pivotal moment. The café was no longer just a place to drink. It was a place to have a light meal, a petit déjeuner. The introduction of simple, elegant pastries made the café an all-day destination, perfect for a morning pick-me-up or a mid-afternoon break. As the 20th century dawned, the menu expanded even further. The fast pace of modern life demanded more substantial options. The café adapted by introducing the sandwich. From the classic French jambon beurre simple baguette with ham and butter to more elaborate creations, the sandwich turned the café into a legitimate lunch spot. It was quick, convenient, and delicious. You could now pop into a café for a business lunch, to meet a friend, or to grab a bite while working. The menu was becoming more practical, reflecting the changing needs of its customers. But it wasn't just about adding more items. The art of presentation became just as important as the food itself. Think about it. The swirl of cream on a Viennese coffee, the dusting of cocoa on a cappuccino, the way a pastry is perfectly placed on a delicate plate. This wasn't just about making food look good. It was about honoring the ingredients and respecting the customer's experience. This gentle art of presentation transforms a simple meal into a small, beautiful ritual. It's a visual promise that what you're about to enjoy is made with care. It's what makes sitting in a cafe feel special, an escape from the ordinary. Today, the cafe menu is a global tapestry. Influences from Italy brought us the espresso machine, giving birth to cappuccinos, lattes, and a whole new language of coffee. American coffee culture introduced flavored syrups, iced drinks, and larger serving sizes. The health and wellness movement added things like oat milk, avocado toast, and grain bowls. The menu is constantly evolving, a living document that reflects our changing tastes, lifestyles, and values. From a single powerful brew in a 16th century Turkish shop to the endless options we have today, the cafe menu tells a story. It's a story of how a simple beverage created spaces for community, and how those spaces evolved to nourish us in more ways than one. So the next time you're looking at that long menu board, take a moment to appreciate the history behind it. Every item, from the simple black coffee to the most elaborate pastry, is a chapter in the long, delicious history of the cafe. It's a testament to how these beloved spaces have always adapted to give us exactly what we need. A little bit of comfort, a little bit of community, and a really good cup of coffee. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the cafe's kitchen. If you enjoyed this little slice of history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration. See you next time. Have you ever wondered why, no matter where you go in the world, from the bustling streets of Cairo to a quiet corner in Paris, you can find a cafe that feels both unique and strangely familiar? Today, we're taking a journey back in time, not just to trace the history of coffee, but to explore how coffee houses became the world's original social network, especially as they spread across colonial empires. This is the story of how a simple bean-powered beverage fueled conversations, art, and even revolutions. Let's set the scene. The story of the cafe begins in the Middle East, in cities like Constantinople and Mecca, around the 15th and 16th centuries. These weren't just places to get a caffeine fix. They were vibrant public spheres. Men from all walks of life would gather to talk politics, play chess, listen to music, and share news. They were nicknamed schools of the wise because they were centers of intellectual exchange. It was in these bustling, aromatic rooms that the idea of the coffee house as a community hub was born. When coffee finally arrived in Europe in the 17th century, it was met with both suspicion and fascination. Some called it the bitter invention of Satan, but its allure was undeniable. London's first coffee house opened in 1652, and soon hundreds dotted the city. They became known as penny universities, because for the price of a cup of coffee, just 1 penny, you could sit for hours, read the latest pamphlets, and engage in heated debates with the sharpest minds of the age. Scientists like Isaac Newton, writers, merchants, and politicians all congregated in these smoky rooms. Lloyd's of London, the famous insurance market, actually started as Lloyd's Coffee House, a gathering spot for sailors, merchants, and ship owners. Each coffee house had its own unique character, attracting a specific crowd, from Whigs and Tories arguing politics to poets and playwrights honing their craft. Parisian cafés took on a different flavor. They became centers of artistic and philosophical life. Picture it, the late 17th and 18th centuries. Luminaries of the Enlightenment, like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot, are gathered at Café Procope, debating liberty, reason, and the rights of man over steaming cups of coffee. These weren't just casual chats. These conversations laid the intellectual groundwork for the French Revolution. The café became a stage for new ideas, a place where the status quo could be challenged, and where the air buzzed with the thrilling possibility of change. But what happened when this European café culture was exported to the colonies? This is where the story gets really interesting. As empires expanded, so did the coffee house. But these new establishments weren't simple carbon copies of their European parents. Instead, they adapted, transformed, and blended with local traditions, creating something entirely new. Let's travel to the Americas. In colonial cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and New York, coffee houses quickly became hotbeds of political dissent. The Green Dragon Tavern in Boston, for example, wasn't just a place for a warm drink. It was the headquarters for the Sons of Liberty. Historians call it the headquarters of the Revolution. It was within the walls of these coffee houses that colonists planned protests, debated independence from Britain, and organized events like the Boston Tea Party. The shared ritual of drinking coffee became intertwined with the shared struggle for freedom. Here, the European model of the penny university was supercharged with revolutionary zeal. Now, let's cross the globe to colonial cities in Asia and Africa. In places like Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, or Cairo under European influence, coffee houses became fascinating cultural crossroads. Here, you'd find Dutch traders, British officials, and local elites all mingling. The architecture might blend European styles with indigenous designs. A menu would offer not just coffee, but also local teas, sweets, and snacks. The conversations would be a mix of languages and perspectives. These colonial cafes were complex spaces. On one hand, they were symbols of imperial power and commerce. On the other, they were places where cultures met, clashed, and sometimes created beautiful new fusions. They were windows into the globalized world that was emerging, a world connected by trade, empire, and the universal appeal of a shared public space. For example, in the port cities of the Levant, the traditional Middle Eastern coffeehouse culture continued to thrive but was also influenced by the influx of European merchants and travelers. You'd see the familiar backgammon boards and hear the strains of an oud, but you might also overhear conversations in French or Italian about shipping routes in global markets. The café became a microcosm of the city itself, a melting pot of old and new, local and foreign. It was a space where a local artisan could be sitting just a few tables away from a diplomat, both participating in the same social ritual, yet experiencing it in vastly different ways. This ability to adapt is the secret to the café's enduring power. It's a space that can be both public and private, local and global. It's a stage for everything from quiet contemplation to loud political debate. From the revolutionary plots hatched in Boston to the artistic manifestos written in Paris and the cross-cultural business deals struck in Batavia, the coffee house has always been more than just a place to drink coffee. It's a crucible for ideas, a hub for community, and a quiet catalyst for social change. So, the next time you settle into your favorite cafe, take a moment to look around. You're participating in a tradition that's centuries old, a tradition of conversation, connection, and community. You're sitting in the modern-day version of a school of the wise, a penny university, and a revolutionary headquarters all rolled into one. The humble coffee house has shaped our world in countless ways, one cup, one conversation at a time. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical journey today. If you enjoyed traveling back in time with us, please give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, so you don't miss our next adventure into the past. We'd love to hear about your favorite cafe in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever walked into a cafe and felt the music just fit? A quiet melody weaving through the clink of cups and the low hum of conversation. It feels timeless, doesn't it? Well, that perfect blend of coffee and music has a rich history. One where cafes became more than just places to get a caffeine fix. They became stages, launching pads for a new kind of sound. Today, we're diving into the soulful story of the jazz cafe. Our story begins in the early 20th century. Coffeehouses had already established themselves as hubs for thinkers, writers, and revolutionaries. But as the world changed, so did the soundtrack of these spaces. The formal classical music of the past began to give way to something more raw, more immediate, and more American: jazz. Imagine the scene: New Orleans, the birthplace of jazz. Small, smoky coffee houses, known locally as cafés, ole spots, were everywhere. In these places, early jazz musicians, often just starting out, could find a space to play. It wasn't the big, brassy sound of a dance hall. Instead, it was more intimate. A lone pianist, a small trio with a clarinet and a guitar, playing for tips and a hot cup of coffee. These weren't formal concerts. They were quiet performances. The music was part of the atmosphere, a living, breathing element that mixed with the aroma of roasted chicory. For the musicians, these cafes were crucial training grounds. They could experiment, improvise, and hone their skills in front of a live, albeit preoccupied, audience. The stakes were low, but the opportunity was immense. They learned to read the room, to play with feeling, and to connect with listeners on a personal level. The cafe crowd wasn't there to dance. They were there to listen, to talk, and to soak in the mood. This taught the musicians the art of subtlety, of creating a texture rather than just a tune. As jazz migrated north to cities like Chicago and New York during the Great Migration, it brought this cafe culture with it. In Greenwich Village, for instance, coffee houses became bohemian havens. Here, jazz wasn't just background music. It was a statement. It was the sound of modernity, of rebellion, of artistic freedom. Poets like the Beats would read their work to the rhythm of a jazz combo. Artists would sketch patrons while a saxophone wailed softly in the corner. The cafe became a multidisciplinary stage, a melting pot of creativity where jazz provided the soulful glue. Think of places like Café or the Gaslight Café. While famous for folk music, their stages were also graced by countless jazz musicians. These weren't grand auditoriums. They were cramped, intimate spaces where you were just feet away from the performers. You could see the sweat on the musician's brow, hear the breath before the note, and feel the vibration of the bass through the floorboards. This proximity created a powerful connection, a shared experience that was deeply personal for both the artist and the audience. Unlike the loud, boisterous speakeasies of the Prohibition era, which were all about secrecy and high energy, jazz cafes offered a different kind of escape. They were places for contemplation. The music was often smoother, cooler. Think of the cool jazz movement that emerged in the 1950s. Artists like Miles Davis or the modern jazz quartet perfected a sound that was sophisticated, understated, and perfect for a relaxed cafe environment. It was music to think to talk over, to fall in love to. It enhanced the conversation rather than drowning it out. The rise of the jazz cafe also democratized live music. You didn't need an expensive ticket to a concert hall. For the price of a coffee, you could experience world-class talent in a casual setting. This made jazz accessible to students, artists, and everyday people, fostering a diverse and dedicated fan base. The cafe became a community center, united by a shared love for good coffee and groundbreaking music. This tradition continues today all over the world. From the legendary jazz kisatons of Tokyo to the cozy clubs in Paris and the modern coffee shops in your own city, the spirit of the jazz cafe is alive and well. These places still serve as incubators for new talent, offering a stage for young musicians to find their voice. They are sanctuaries from the noise of the outside world, where you can slow down, listen, and connect. The music creates a mood, a specific feeling that transforms a simple room into a memorable experience. It's a soft power, shaping our emotions and interactions without us even realizing it. The Jazz Café taught us that a performance doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the most profound moments happen in the quiet spaces with a warm cup in hand and a melody that speaks directly to the soul. So the next time you hear a smooth jazz trio playing in the corner of your favorite coffee shop, take a moment to appreciate it. You're not just listening to background music. You're participating in a century-old tradition. A tradition of conversation, art, and slow, soulful change, all stirred together with the perfect soundtrack. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the history of the Jazz Café. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into cultural history, and hit that notification bell. And I'd love to hear from you. What's your favorite music to listen to in a cafe? Let me know in the comments below. See you next time. Hello and welcome back to our series on the history of the cafe. Today, we're diving into a fascinating relationship, the one between the coffee house and the newspaper. How did these bustling public spaces become the quiet reading rooms of their day, shaping how we consume news, shared gossip, and even found moments for personal reflection? Let's pour ourselves a cup and find out. Imagine a time before instant updates, before notifications buzzed in our pockets. In the 17th and 18th centuries, information traveled at the speed of a horse or a ship. News was a precious commodity, and for most people, it was expensive and difficult to access. Early newspapers were often single sheets packed with shipping news, political reports, and foreign dispatches. Buying one every day was a luxury few could afford. But what if you could pay the price of a single cup of coffee and gain access to dozens of them? This was the genius of the coffee house. For the small admission fee of a penny, the price of a dish of coffee, a patron could enter and have a world of information at their fingertips. Coffee house proprietors quickly realized that providing a wide array of the latest newspapers, pamphlets, and gazettes was a brilliant business strategy. It drew in customers who would stay for hours, ordering more coffee as they read. Soon, coffee houses became synonymous with news. They were nicknamed penny universities because for just a penny, anyone, regardless of their social standing, could get an education in current affairs. These weren't just silent libraries, though. The reading was a communal activity. A literate customer might read a particularly juicy piece of news aloud to the entire room, sparking immediate debate and discussion. One person might read a report from a London paper, while another would share a contradictory account from a Parisian gazette. It was a living, breathing fact-checking environment, where official reports were scrutinized and compared against gossip and first-hand accounts from sailors or merchants who had just arrived in town. Think of it as the original social media feed. News wasn't just consumed, it was actively discussed, dissected, and debated. This created a more informed and engaged public. Political ideas that were once confined to the elite were now being debated over a cup of coffee by merchants, clerks, and artisans. The government certainly noticed. They were often wary of these spaces where public opinion could be swayed and dissent could be brewed just as easily as the coffee. Some even tried to suppress coffee houses, viewing them as hotbeds of sedition. But the coffee house wasn't just for fiery political debate. It also offered a unique kind of social space, a place where you could be alone, together. Amidst the hum of conversation, you could retreat into the pages of a newspaper or a literary journal. It was a place for quiet contemplation, a public sanctuary where you could catch up on the world, write letters, or simply watch the city go by. This blend of social buzz and personal quiet is a core part of the cafe experience that we still cherish today. The relationship was symbiotic. Coffee houses needed newspapers to draw in patrons, and newspapers relied on coffee houses for their distribution and readership. Many journalists and writers would even use their favorite coffee house as a mailing address. If you wanted to send a letter to the editor of the Tatler or the Spectator, two of the most famous periodicals of the era, you'd dare send it to a specific coffee house where the writers, Joseph Addison and Richard Steele, were known to frequent. These establishments became the nerve centers of the burgeoning print industry. The news shared wasn't always high-minded politics, of course. Gossip was a huge draw. Who was seen with whom? Which merchant's ship was lost at sea? Which politician was involved in a scandal? This blend of hard news and salacious rumor made the newspapers irresistible, and the coffee house was the perfect stage to hear the latest whispers and share your own. It was a space that satisfied the universal human desires to be informed and to be in the know. As the centuries passed, this model evolved. Newspapers became cheaper and more widely available, and home delivery became common. But the café's role as an information hub never truly disappeared. Even today, how many of us grab a coffee and scroll through the news on our phones? Or meet a friend at a cafe to discuss the latest headlines? We're participating in a tradition that's over 300 years old. We've simply swapped the printed broadsheet for a glowing screen. But the fundamental act remains the same, sharing information and ideas over a cup of coffee. The coffee house democratized information. It took news out of the exclusive hands of the wealthy and powerful and placed it on the common table, available to anyone with a penny to spare. It taught people to question, to debate, and to form their own opinions based on a variety of sources. By becoming the city's reading room, the coffee house didn't just serve drinks. It served knowledge, fostered a more engaged citizenry, and laid the groundwork for the modern world of media we live in today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through history. It really makes you see your local cafe in a new light, doesn't it? If you enjoyed this, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories from the fascinating world of the coffee house. We'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our series on the history of the cafe. Take a look around any coffee shop near a university campus today, and what do you see? Students huddled over laptops, textbooks piled high, headphones on, fueled by lattes and the low hum of conversation. It feels like such a modern scene, doesn't it? But what if I told you that the student cafe is a tradition with deep, influential roots stretching back centuries? This isn't just about finding a place with free Wi-Fi. It's about spaces that have quietly nurtured revolutions, masterpieces, and the very minds that would go on to shape our future. Today, we're diving into the fascinating story of the student cafe, exploring how these buzzing hubs became essential breeding grounds for study, dreams, and slow, deliberate social change. Let's journey back to the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe. The first coffee houses were popping up in cities like London, Paris, and Vienna, and they were a sensation. Before coffee, the common public drink was often alcohol. The arrival of this new, stimulating, non-alcoholic beverage was revolutionary. Suddenly, there was a place where you could go to sharpen your mind, not dull it. These early coffee houses were dubbed penny universities because for the price of a single cup of coffee, you could access a world of information. Newspapers were readily available, and you were surrounded by thinkers, merchants, and politicians engaged in spirited debate. Naturally, this environment was a magnet for students. University life back then was often rigid and formal. The lecture halls were stuffy, and the libraries were silent, governed by strict rules. The coffee house offered a liberating alternative. It was a third place, distinct from home and the university. Here, students could gather outside the watchful eyes of their professors. They could discuss the radical new ideas they were learning in philosophy, science, and politics, but they could do so on their own terms. Imagine young scholars, fresh from a lecture on Enlightenment principles, rushing to a cafe to argue about Rousseau, Voltaire, or the rights of man over a steaming cup. The coffee house wasn't just a place to drink coffee. It was an extension of the classroom, but one that was more democratic, more chaotic, and infinitely more exciting. As we move into the 19th and early 20th centuries, the student cafe solidifies its identity as a hub for both intellectual and artistic pursuits. Think of the bohemian cafes of Paris's left bank, like Les Deux Magots or Café de Flore. These places became legendary as the haunts of students, writers, and artists. Young minds from the Sorbonne would rub shoulders with aspiring painters and poets. This created an incredible cross-pollination of ideas. A law student might find their political theories challenged by a surrealist artist, or a medical student might get lost in a conversation about existentialism with a philosophy major. This was where academic theory met creative passion. The affordability of coffee meant that even the most impoverished student could afford to linger for hours, nursing a single cup while absorbing the intellectual energy of the room. It was in these smoky, crowded spaces that lifelong friendships were forged, artistic movements were born, and political manifestos were drafted on napkins. The student cafe wasn't just for idle chatter, though. It was a serious place of work. For many students living in cramped, cold dormitories or shared rooms, the cafe was a godsend. It offered light, warmth, and a relatively quiet corner to study. It was a place of focused solitude within a social setting. You could be alone with your books, yet feel part of a larger community of learners. This unique blend of private study and public life is something we still see today. The cafe provided the perfect background noise for concentration for some, while for others, the presence of fellow students created a sense of shared purpose and mutual, unspoken support. You weren't just studying alone. You were part of a collective effort, all striving towards a brighter future. But let's not forget the slow social change aspect. Student cafes have often been quiet epicenters of political awakening. They were safe havens where students could discuss forbidden ideas and organize. Away from the university administration and state authorities, these were spaces where dissent could be nurtured. Student groups advocating for reform, independence, or social justice often held their first informal meetings in the corner of a cafe. The conversations that started over coffee could slowly blossom into organized movements. While not always the site of dramatic protests, the student cafe was the crucial incubator where the intellectual groundwork for that change was laid. It was where students first learned to articulate their dissatisfaction, found solidarity with their peers, and began to dream of a different, better world. They were testing out their voices and building the confidence to challenge the status quo. Fast forward to the mid-20th century. The post-war era and the counterculture movements of the 1960s saw the student cafe take on an even more significant role. In places like Berkeley, California, or across European capitals, cafes near universities became nerve centers for student activism. They were filled with folk music, poetry readings, and intense debates about civil rights, war, and freedom of speech. The coffee house was the unofficial headquarters for planning marches and organizing campaigns. It was a symbol of a new generation finding its voice. The simple act of gathering in a cafe became a political statement in itself, a declaration of community and a rejection of mainstream conformity. It was where the personal became political, as students connected their academic studies to the pressing issues of the day. So what about today? Has the laptop and the smartphone killed the spirit of the student cafe? I don't think so. While the technology has changed, the fundamental human need for a third place remains. Students still flock to cafes for the same reasons their predecessors did centuries ago: to study, to think, to dream, and to connect. The conversations might happen over DMs as well as over lattes, and the manifestos might be blog posts instead of pamphlets, but the core function is the same. The cafe is still a space where young minds can escape the pressures of home and the formality of school. It's a place to find focus, to be inspired by the energy of others, and to feel part of a community. It is where you can have that chance encounter with a classmate from another department that sparks a new idea, or where you can sit and quietly figure out your place in the world. The legacy of the Penny University is alive and well, continuing to shape the future, one student and one cup of coffee at a time. Thanks so much for watching. The history of coffee is a story about people, and the student cafe is a perfect example of that. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound changes begin not in grand halls, but in the simple, everyday spaces where we gather to talk and to dream. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in our series. See you next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Have you ever noticed how often a pivotal movie scene happens in a cafe? It's not a coincidence. From the bustling coffee shops of Paris to the quiet diners of small-town America, cafes in cinema are more than just a place to grab a drink. They are a character in themselves, a stage for some of film's most memorable moments. Think about it. Where do characters go for a first date, a tense confrontation, a quiet moment of reflection, or a life-altering decision? Very often it's a cafe. Why is that? Because cafes are what we call a third place. a neutral ground between the pressures of home and work. They're public yet intimate. You can be alone in a crowd or have a deeply personal conversation shielded by the gentle hum of activity around you. Filmmakers use this unique atmosphere to create a sense of realism and emotional depth. Let's travel back to the golden age of French cinema. In Jean-Pierre Melville's Le Samouraï, the sterile, minimalist café reflects the protagonist's cold, isolated existence. The café isn't a place of warmth, but of waiting and watching, a perfect visual for a hitman's lonely life. Contrast that with the vibrant, romantic energy of the Parisian café in Amélie. It's where dreams are born, where connections are made, and where Amélie herself orchestrates little moments of joy for others. The same type of location is used to convey completely opposite feelings. Now, let's hop over to the United States. Who can forget the iconic diner scenes in Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction? The opening and closing scenes at the Hawthorne Grill are electric with tension and witty dialogue. The diner isn't just a backdrop. It's a powder keg where normalcy can explode into chaos at any second. The mundane setting of a coffee shop makes the sudden violence and sharp dialogue even more shocking and memorable. It's a masterclass in using a familiar space to subvert audience expectations. On the quieter side of things, consider the movie Before Sunrise. The entire film is essentially a long conversation, and a significant part of it takes place in a charming Viennese café. Here, the café becomes a sanctuary. It's a space where two strangers, Jesse and Celine, can open up to each other, sharing their hopes, fears, and philosophies over a simple cup of coffee. The setting allows for an extended, uninterrupted dialogue that feels natural and deeply intimate. The cafe gives their fleeting connection a place to breathe and blossom. It's a visual metaphor for the pause they've taken from their ordinary lives to experience something extraordinary. And it's not just about romance or crime. In Michael Mann's thriller, Heat, one of the most legendary scenes in modern cinema unfolds in a cafe. We see Al Pacino, the determined detective, and Robert De Niro, the master criminal, sitting across from each other. There are no guns, no shouting, just two titans at the top of their game, sharing a moment of mutual respect and understanding. The stark, impersonal coffee shop highlights the professional, almost formal nature of their rivalry. It's a neutral battlefield where the psychological war is waged, making their eventual physical confrontation even more impactful. Even in animation, the cafe plays a key role. Think of the cozy motel office in Cars, which functions like a community cafe, or the Tapper arcade game in Wreck-It Ralph, which is essentially a digital pub where characters unwind. These spaces serve the same purpose. They are the heart of the community, where characters gather, share news, and build relationships. So why does this resonate so much with us, the audience? Because it mirrors our own lives. We've all had important conversations in cafes. We've gone there to celebrate, to mourn, to work, or to simply watch the world go by. When we see a character in a cafe on screen, we instantly understand the context. We recognize the space as a place for pause, for connection, and for human drama to unfold. From the smoky intellectual hubs of film noir to the bright, cheerful coffee shops of modern rom-coms, the cafe is a powerful tool for visual storytelling. It can represent community, isolation, romance, or suspense. It's a simple, universal setting that allows filmmakers to explore the most complex aspects of the human condition, all over a humble cup of coffee. So the next time you're watching a movie and the characters walk into a cafe, pay attention. Ask yourself, what is this space really saying? What emotions is it meant to evoke? You might find that the scene is about much more than just the coffee. Thanks so much for joining me on this cinematic journey today. What's your favorite cafe scene in a movie? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more content. It really helps the channel out. Until next time, stay caffeinated and keep watching. Ever wonder how we went from a simple pot of coffee to that perfect creamer-topped espresso shot you love? It's a story of steam, pressure, and a complete revolution in how we experience coffee. Today, we're diving into the rise of the espresso machine and how it transformed the cafe forever. Before espresso, coffee brewing was a slower, gentler affair. Think drip pots, percolators, or the classic Turkish ibrik. It was a ritual, yes, but it took time. The pace was leisurely, matching the long, winding conversations that coffee houses were famous for. But as the 19th century roared into the 20th, the world started moving faster. Industry was booming, cities were growing, and people needed their coffee quick. The stage was set for a big change. Our story begins in Turin, Italy. In 1884, a man named Angelo Moriondo patented the first known machine that used both steam and water to brew coffee in bulk. It was a massive, impressive contraption designed for big events, like the Turin General Exposition. Imagine a huge ornate boiler that could churn out coffee for a crowd. Moriondo's invention was a brilliant first step, but it wasn't quite the personal, single-shot espresso we know today. It was more about speed and quantity. The real breakthrough came a few years later, at the turn of the century. Enter Luigi Bizzarra, a Milanese inventor. He wasn't happy with how long it took to brew a single cup of coffee. He tinkered and improved upon Moriondo's design, creating a machine that could force pressurized water through a small amount of finely ground coffee. He called it the fast coffee machine. His patents from 1901 introduced key elements we still see today, like portafilters and multiple brew heads. This was it, the birth of espresso, which literally means expressed or pressed out coffee. But Bizzarra was more of an inventor than a businessman. In 1905, he sold his patent to Desiderio Pavoni. Pavoni was a marketing genius. He recognized the potential immediately. At the 1906 Milan Fair, he showcased the ideal machine, a beautiful, vertical, nickel-plated boiler that looked like a work of art. Pavoni didn't just sell a machine. He sold an experience. He marketed the idea of a quick, strong, and freshly made coffee served in a theatrical puff of steam. Cafés that had one of these machines weren't just serving coffee. They were putting on a show. The barista became a performer, a skilled technician operating this magnificent piece of engineering. The early espresso machines were, let's say, a bit temperamental. They relied purely on steam pressure, which could be inconsistent. If the pressure was too high, you'd get a burnt, bitter shot. Too low, and it was weak and watery. Baristas had to be incredibly skilled, almost intuitive, to pull a decent shot. These machines were often called steam-powered, because steam did most of the work, pushing the water through the coffee grounds. The result was a strong coffee, but it often lacked the rich, creamy layer we now call crema. The next giant leap happened in the post-war era in 1947. A man named Achille Gaggia changed everything. Up until then, machines used steam pressure at around 1.5 to 2 bars. Gaggia developed a revolutionary piston lever system. The barista would pull down a large lever, which would force hot water through the coffee grounds at a much higher pressure, around 8 to 10 bars. This high pressure was the magic ingredient. It extracted more oils and colloids from the coffee beans, creating a thicker, more concentrated shot with a beautiful, stable layer of reddish-brown foam on top. He called this foam crema natural cream. This was the birth of modern espresso. Gaggia's invention didn't just change the coffee, it changed the café itself. The act of pulling the lever was dramatic and required physical effort. The barista became even more central to the coffee experience. The hissing sound of the steam, the rhythmic pull of the lever, the aroma of the freshly extracted espresso, it was a multi-sensory symphony. Cafés installed long bars where customers could stand, chat with the barista and down their espresso shot in a few quick sips before heading on their way. This created a new, faster-paced social dynamic within the classic coffee house. From Italy, the espresso machine began its global conquest. Italian immigrants brought their culture and their love for espresso to cities around the world, from London to New York to Melbourne. In the 1950s, companies like FEMA introduced even more innovations, like the famous E61 group head in 1961. This new design used a pump to deliver consistent pressure, removing the need for the physically demanding lever and making it easier for more baristas to pull a perfect shot every time. It also pre-infused the coffee grounds with hot water, further enhancing the flavor extraction. The espresso machine had completely redefined the rhythm of the café. It introduced a new vocabulary: shots, crema, portafilters, tamping. It created a new profession, the barista. And it gave us a new way to enjoy coffee, quick, intense, and social. It was a perfect blend of industrial innovation and artisanal craft. So, the next time you hear the whir of a grinder and the hiss of an espresso machine, take a moment to appreciate the century of ingenuity packed into that sound. From Moriondo's steam-powered giant to Gaggia's lever and beyond, the espresso machine is more than just a tool. It's the heart of the modern café, a beautiful piece of history that continues to connect us, one perfect shot at a time. Thanks for joining us on this journey through coffee history. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more stories, and let us know in the comments what your favorite coffee ritual is. See you next time. Take a moment and think about your favorite café. What does it look like? Maybe it's a bustling Starbucks on a busy corner, or a quiet, cozy spot with mismatched chairs. We often see these places as just a stop for our daily caffeine fix. But what if I told you that the simple act of grabbing a coffee is part of a revolutionary story stretching back centuries? A story of art, politics, and social change, all brewed in a single cup. Today, we're diving into the incredible history of the café, from clandestine meeting spots for thinkers to the global chains that define our modern cityscapes. It all begins in the 5th, 10th, and 16th centuries, not in Europe, but in the bustling cities of the Ottoman Empire, like Constantinople and Cairo. Here, the first coffee houses or cafés emerged. These weren't just places to drink the new exotic beverage called coffee. They were vibrant public spaces. In a time before newspapers and the internet, coffee houses were the epicenters of information. People from all walks of life, merchants, scholars, artisans, would gather to exchange news, gossip, conduct business, and enjoy entertainment like poetry readings and games of chess. They were nicknamed schools of the wise because they offered a unique form of public education and debate, a place where ideas could be freely exchanged outside the rigid structures of the mosque or the palace. When coffee finally arrived in Europe in the 17th century, it brought the coffeehouse culture with it. The first one in England opened in Oxford in 1650, quickly followed by an explosion of them in London. These English coffeehouses became known as penny universities. For the price of a penny, the cost of a cup of coffee, any man could enter and listen to the most brilliant minds of the age. Scientists like Isaac Newton, writers like Alexander Pope, and politicians would gather, turning these establishments into hotbeds of intellectual and political discourse. It was in these smoky, caffeine-fueled rooms that new ideas in science, finance, and even democracy were debated and developed. Lloyd's of London, the famous insurance market, actually started as a coffeehouse where merchants and ship owners met to share shipping news. Across the Channel in Paris, the café took on a more artistic and revolutionary flair. Places like the Café Procope, which opened in 1686 and is still operating today, became the favorite haunts of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot. Imagine sitting at a table next to them as they passionately debated liberty, reason, and the rights of man. These Parisian cafés were the crucibles where the ideas that would fuel the French Revolution were forged. Later, they became the stages for artistic movements, where impressionist painters and existentialist philosophers would gather to share their work and shape the future of culture. The café wasn't just a place to be seen. It was a place to become. But how did we get from Voltaire's Parisian café to the drive-through window? The 20th century brought a massive shift in our relationship with coffee and the places we drink it. The rise of instant coffee after World War II moved coffee consumption into the home. For a while, the public coffeehouse seemed to be in decline. But then came the second wave of coffee culture, and with it, the rise of the global café chain. Starbucks, founded in Seattle in 1971, didn't just sell coffee, it sold an experience. It introduced the concept of the third place, a comfortable, welcoming environment outside of home and work where people could relax, meet friends, or work on their laptops. This model was revolutionary. Chains like Starbucks, Costa Coffee, and others perfected a formula that offered consistency and convenience on a global scale. You could walk into a Starbucks in Tokyo, London, Or Dubai and know exactly what to expect, the same menu, the same layout, the same reliable Wi-Fi. This standardization was key to their success. They balanced speed for the morning commuter with the comfort of a plush armchair for the student who needs to study for hours. They democratized specialty coffee, introducing terms like latte and cappuccino to the masses and transforming the simple coffee break into a daily ritual for millions. However, this global reshaping of the cafe experience hasn't been without its critics. The very efficiency and uniformity that make chains so successful can sometimes feel impersonal, a stark contrast to the unique, chaotic, and fiercely independent coffeehouses of the past. Many people argue that these global brands can push out smaller local cafes, leading to a homogenization of our city streets. The emphasis on speed and to-go culture can also work against the original purpose of the coffeehouse, to be a place for slow conversation and lingering. The penny university has, in some ways, been replaced by a quick transaction. Yet, it's not a simple story of good versus bad. The rise of major chains has also sparked a powerful counter-movement. The third wave of coffee culture has seen a resurgence of independent, artisanal coffee shops that focus on quality, ethical sourcing, and creating a unique community space. In a way, these local cafes are reclaiming the spirit of the original coffee houses. They are once again becoming hubs for local art, conversation, and community building, each with its own distinct identity. So, the modern coffee landscape is a fascinating mix. We have the global giants offering speed and familiarity, and the independent artisans offering craft and community. So, the next time you step into a cafe, whether it's a global chain or a quirky local spot, take a moment to look around. You're participating in a tradition that's over 500 years old. You're in a space that has fueled revolutions, inspired masterpieces, and built global economies. From the schools of the wise in Constantinople to the penny universities of London, from the revolutionary debates in Paris to the global network of today's brands, the cafe has always been more than just a place to get a drink. It's a reflection of society itself, a place where we connect, think, create, and of course, enjoy a great cup of coffee. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through history. What does your ideal cafe look like? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories like this. We'll see you in the next one. Hello, and here is our journey through the history of the cafe. So far, we've traveled from the bustling coffeehouses of the Ottoman Empire to the intellectual salons of Enlightenment Europe and the revolutionary cafes of Paris. We've seen how these spaces have consistently been at the heart of conversation, art, and social change. Today, we're arriving in the modern era to explore a phenomenon that has completely redefined our relationship with a simple cup of coffee, the third wave. If the first wave was about making coffee accessible in every home, and the second wave was about turning it into a social experience with lattes and cappuccinos, the third wave is all about one thing: craft. It's a quiet, dedicated return to the very essence of the coffee bean itself. Suddenly, coffee wasn't just a dark, bitter liquid to wake you up. It became a delicate, nuanced beverage with a story to tell, a story of origin, altitude, and processing. The third wave cafe is less like a fast food joint and more like a winery or a craft brewery. The focus shifted from speed and consistency to quality and artistry. The barista, once a simple operator of an espresso machine, transformed into a skilled artisan, a knowledgeable guide who could walk you through the tasting notes of a single origin pour-over from Ethiopia versus a washed processed bean from Colombia. It's a world where terms like terroir, bloom, and extraction time became part of the everyday vocabulary. THINK about the cafe experience today. You walk in, and it's not just the smell of coffee, but the sounds that define it. The gentle hiss of the steam wand, the rhythmic tap of the portafilter, the slow, deliberate pour of hot water over a V60 dripper. The machinery itself became a centerpiece gleaming, precision-engineered tools designed for one purpose: to extract the perfect cup. Brands like La Marzocco, Hario, and Chemex became symbols of this dedication to quality. This movement was a rebellion against the homogenized, often burnt taste of mass-market coffee. Pioneers of the third wave, like Blue Bottle, Stumptown, and Intelligentsia, started by sourcing their own beans directly from farmers. This wasn't just about taste. It was about ethics and transparency. Direct trade relationships meant farmers were paid fairly for their high-quality crops, creating a sustainable model that benefited everyone from the grower to the drinker. Your morning cup was no longer anonymous. It had a name, a face, and a specific place on the map. This obsession with detail created a whole new culture. It encouraged a slower pace. You don't rush a pour-over. You watch it bloom and drip, a mindful ritual that takes a few minutes. This process invites you to slow down, to appreciate the craftsmanship, and to actually taste what you're drinking. Are you detecting notes of blueberry, citrus, chocolate? It turned coffee consumption from a passive habit into an active sensory experience. The aesthetic of the third wave café also reflected this philosophy. Gone were the dark, cozy armchairs of the second wave. In their place came minimalist designs, natural light, reclaimed wood, and an open layout where the coffee bar was the main stage. The focus was on the coffee and the community, creating a clean, uncluttered space for conversation and connection, much like the original coffee houses centuries ago. It's a space where you can work on your laptop, meet a friend, or simply sit and savor the moment. This movement also democratized specialty coffee. What started in niche shops in Portland, San Francisco, and Chicago quickly spread across the globe. Suddenly, you could find a beautifully crafted flat white in a small town in the Midwest or a perfectly pulled espresso shot in a bustling market in Seoul. Knowledge that was once exclusive to a few roasters and baristas became accessible to everyone through blogs, YouTube tutorials, and workshops. Home brewing kits became more sophisticated, allowing enthusiasts to replicate the cafe experience in their own kitchens. The third wave wasn't a loud revolution. It was a quiet one. It was a slow, deliberate shift that asked us to reconsider something we thought we knew so well. It taught us that coffee isn't just fuel, but a culinary product as complex and worthy of appreciation as wine or cheese. It recentered the cafe as a hub not just for social gathering, but for a shared passion for craft and quality. It's a testament to how even the smallest daily ritual can be elevated into an art form, connecting us to a global community of growers, roasters, and fellow coffee lovers. So, the next time you step into a cafe and see the barista carefully weighing beans or timing a pour, remember that you're witnessing the legacy of this quiet obsession. You're part of a story that's been brewing for centuries. A story of how a simple bean continues to bring us together, one carefully crafted cup at a time. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of the third wave. I hope it's given you a new appreciation for your daily coffee. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever settled into your favorite cafe with the smell of roasted coffee in the air and the gentle murmur of conversations around you, and wondered how this space came to be? It's more than just a place to get a caffeine fix. It's a legacy, a tradition, and a hub of human connection that has been brewing for centuries. Today, we're going to journey back in time to uncover the fascinating history of the cafe and how these humble coffee houses became powerful centers for conversation, art, and even revolution. Our story begins not in Paris or Vienna, but in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, in places like Mecca and Constantinople. Around the 15th and 16th centuries, coffee, originally from Ethiopia, had made its way across the Red Sea. At first, it was used by Sufi mystics to stay awake during long nights of prayer. But soon its appeal spread. The very first coffee houses, known as cafés, opened their doors. These were radical new spaces. For the first time, men from all walks of life, merchants, scholars, artisans, could gather outside of the home or the mosque on an equal footing. Imagine it, a dimly lit room, filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, served strong and black in small cups. Men would sit on cushions, not just drinking, but talking. They discussed business, politics, and poetry. They played chess and backgammon. These weren't just shops. They were schools of the wise, places where news was exchanged, ideas were debated, and public opinion was formed. The authorities were often suspicious of these gatherings, seeing them as potential hotbeds for dissent. In fact, some rulers tried to ban coffeehouses altogether, but the public's love for them was too strong. The coffeehouse had already established itself as an essential part of urban life. By the 17th century, the coffee craze swept into Europe, brought by traders and travelers from the East. The first coffeehouse in England opened in Oxford in 1650, quickly becoming a favorite haunt for students and academics. 2 years later, London got its first coffeehouse in St. Michael's Alley. Within a few decades, hundreds of them dotted the city. London's coffeehouses were nicknamed penny universities because for the price of a single penny, you could buy a cup of coffee and gain access to a world of information and intellectual debate. Each coffeehouse developed its own unique character and clientele. If you were a scientist, you might go to the Grecian to discuss the latest discoveries with members of the Royal Society. If you were in shipping or trade, you'd head to Edward Lloyd's Coffeehouse, which eventually grew into the world-famous insurance market, Lloyd's of London. Aspiring writers like Joseph Addison and Richard Steele practically lived in these places, gathering material for their influential journals, The Tatler and The Spectator. This was the birth of the public sphere, a space where private citizens could come together to discuss matters of common concern, shaping society through the power of conversation. Across the English Channel, Paris was having its own coffeehouse love affair. The famous Café Procope, opened in 1686, became the city's first literary café. It was a place of incredible intellectual energy. Imagine sitting at a table next to Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, or Diderot, as they debated philosophy, human rights, and the nature of government. Voltaire was said to have drunk up to 40 cups of coffee a day here. These cafés were the crucibles where the ideas that would fuel the French Revolution were forged. They were spaces of freedom, where radical thought could flourish away from the prying eyes of the monarchy. As we move into the 18th and 19th centuries, the café continues to evolve. In Vienna, the elegant coffeehouses became known for their grandeur, with plush seating, marble-topped tables, and newspapers offered on wooden racks. They were seen as an extension of the living room, a place to linger for hours over a single cup of coffee, reading, writing, or simply watching the world go by. This Viennese coffeehouse culture, with its emphasis on leisure and comfort, was so unique that UNESCO has since declared it an intangible cultural heritage. It was here that figures like Sigmund Freud would meet with his intellectual circle, shaping the future of psychology. In the early 20th century, Parisian cafés like Les Deux Magots and Café de Flore and Saint-Germain-des-Prés became the epicenter of the artistic and literary avant-garde. This was the stomping ground for existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, who would write their groundbreaking works while chain-smoking and sipping coffee. It was where artists like Picasso and writers like Hemingway and James Joyce gathered, sharing ideas, collaborating, and shaping the course of modernism. The café was their office, their studio, and their salon, all rolled into one. It was a space that nurtured creativity, fueled by caffeine and community. But what about the slow social change? A coffeehouse was often a quiet revolutionary. By providing a space for different social classes to mix, it helped break down rigid social barriers. The free exchange of information challenged the control of the state and the church. The discussions held within their walls laid the intellectual groundwork for major political shifts, from the Enlightenment to revolutions across Europe. It was also one of the first public spaces where the modern newspaper became a staple, fostering a more informed and engaged citizenry. It wasn't always loud. Often the change was a gradual simmering process, like coffee brewing slowly, and that brings us to today. Think about your own favorite cafe. It might be a sleek, minimalist spot with Wi-Fi for remote workers, a cozy neighborhood joint with worn-out armchairs, or a bustling chain where you grab your morning latte. The style has changed, but the essence remains the same. The coffee house is still a third place, a space that is not our home and not our work, but a vital anchor for our community life. It's where we meet friends, have first dates, conduct business meetings, and find a quiet corner to read or work. It's a place for both solitude and society. In an age of digital communication and social media, The physical, real-world connection offered by a cafe feels more important than ever. It's a timeless space where the simple act of sharing a cup of coffee continues to foster conversation, comfort, and quiet change. From the schools of the wise in 16th century Constantinople to the laptop-filled tables of today, the cafe endures. It's a testament to our fundamental human need to gather, to talk, and to share a space together. A cup of coffee holds centuries of history, art, and revolution within it. So the next time you step into a cafe, take a moment to look around. You're part of a long, beautiful tradition. You're in a space that has shaped the world in countless ways, one conversation at a time. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this, please give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. See you next time, and this is the end of this video. Thank you for watching.